Hello.
Hello.
I literally used every single last second of study. Um, yeah, so I have been on a mad fest these past couple weeks because of Shannon getting harassed over Medusa stuff yet again. And so I was just like, you know what? Fuck it. We're deep diving. So like I need you to see how much material I've been working with. And this doesn't count the shit on my phone too. This is Religions of Rome. This was from my Roman history class, which I've shouted out once on this podcast before. It is the one that I used to get high before every time. And then, let's see. Yeah, I have two different versions of the Metamorphosis just because I wanted to see if they had different things. This one actually doesn't have enough commentary that I used it much, but I did use my actual English version of the Metamorphosis. Um, I have more than one copy of Ars Amatoria. I ended up using an online one because having more than one copy of Latin, it's not in English. So I did look at some of the commentary in here, but I ended up just reading it online. 12 Caesars, because I looked a little bit at Augustus's chapter. This is written by Suetonius, so this is actually an ancient source talking about the emperors. And then just for funsies, because all of the names of Roman official offices are in Latin, I just had a dictionary nearby. Then yeah, today was JSTOR day, so went on JSTOR, the database, because I have access through my school, and when I found that out, I was like, yes, all the time. So yeah, my research has been wide and varied, but I really want to dig into Augustus and Ovid because I really feel like all of these people that talk about how Ovid is an unreliable source for mythology, they're misunderstanding Ovid by a lot. And I mean, I can sum the whole thing up almost right now in that Ovid is using mythology much in the way that we do. And he's using it to talk about the human experience. He's not using it to say this is definitive, religious dogma, because that didn't exist back then. That's a Christian invention. Christians are the ones who decided we're going to come up with a system of religion and say these things are allowed, these things aren't allowed, these stories are the true ones, these ones are just fringe cult ones, and everything in between. And yet still Christians can't even agree because look at how many different sects of Christianity there are, you know? And I'm going to even count Mormonism in there because weird shit happened in Rome too, you know? There was definitely one state religion that everybody had to follow the festivals for and be participant in, but it wasn't necessarily that you had to believe in it or be sincere. It's just that they believed that the gods of the state controlled everything, and if you piss them off, we're not going to have crops, all of our enemies are going to defeat us, and we're all going to die of sickness and strife and stuff. So that's what it is. So to kind of dive into the history portion first, which is going to be the worst portion for me because I'm not a history girly. I really had to dig deep for this. So we start off, I kind of want to start off with Rome's kings because Rome, when it was founded, Romulus was a king, and the first 7 rulers were kings. The first 6 are generally well regarded. You know, they talk about things like Romulus worked with the gods to set up the lines of where Rome exists and line up all the temples and create all of the calendar of festivals and stuff. And then subsequent emperors added on priesthoods and more temples. And then we get to the 7th king of Rome, and that's Tarquin Superbus, Tarquin the Proud. He is exactly what you think of when you think of a bad king, you know, a tyrant, killed his enemies, some of which being senators that he didn't replace, Just generally, people didn't like him and we're not fond of him. But the nail in the coffin for this dude, apparently, was that a bunch of politicians were bragging, I have the most pious wife. No, I have the most pious wife. Your guys' wife are all whores. And the dude who was like, actually, no, it's my wife. Um, Tarquin went to the wife when he found out that she actually was the most pious because all the other girls are out there doing whatever and she's at home weeping. Mm-hmm. And Tarquin threatens her. He's like, I want you. And if you do not let me have you, I'm going to tell everybody I caught you with a slave boy. Not knowing what to do because she's a poor, pious woman. She's not going to attack this man who's attacking her. She submits. But when she does, she eventually tells her husband what happened and his friends that come with him. And then, despite their pleas for her, because it wasn't her fault, she kills herself. And the men go and avenge her death. And that's how Rome stopped having kings. A lot of people generally just did not like kings because of that history. They were like, kings were bad for us. We're so much better with our system, with consuls, and more of a republic.
And I feel like to say about that story too, that all of the myths were written by like powerful men. Mm-hmm. And so like remember when you hear that story that a group of really powerful men, that is how bad they thought that situation was. Mm-hmm. And like granted, like, you know, the wife is like super pious and just sits at home knitting and doesn't do anything bad ever. And so of course they're like, okay, this is like the perfect victim. Of course, she's the one that we're gonna like be really upset about. But still, like, you have to wonder how bad that situation actually was even before that moment. That because the powerful men are always the last people to realize that something is wrong.
Yeah.
And so just wonder like what other people were going through that weren't that pious lady that like was probably being horribly abused. If you're just sitting at home all the time knitting and not going anywhere or doing anything, that doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, so that's like the mytho history of Rome's kings, and people just hate kings. They think kings are awful. They never want a king again. Enter Julius Caesar, who says, you know, not only do I hold this political office, but I'm a descendant of Aeneas. And Aeneas is the proto-Roman. He is a Trojan who traveled from Troy to Italy to eventually come upon, like, he's not the founder of Rome, it's Romulus and Remus, but he's the one who brought the race of people there, is kind of what the mytho history is. And so by Julius saying this, and by him being such a leader, and you know, it's kind of giving king energy, which is why he got taken out, why people didn't like him. You know, it was giving king, and also the foreign influence stuff, yada yada. Anyways, he dies. He's killed by his Senate, and he names his nephew Octavian as his heir. And Octavian then, you know, there's a period of civil war. Octavian's kind of at the forefront of one team. Eventually, his team wins out. But this period of civil war left Rome really broken. It left people, you know, like the city itself was broken. The people were tired. Probably a lot of them had trouble with money and resources and stuff. So Augustus comes in with, you know, like this energy that Julius left behind of, I'm partially divine, partially political. He eventually slowly picks up every single official office in Rome, and he's the emperor, you know, like it comes to a point where you can't deny he has all of the power, because even if he's not in the office himself, he stacks the cards. He gets people that are friends or family or somehow related to him in every single official office. And there were people that liked him. You know, there were people that saw his period of rebuilding and of trying to revitalize Rome as actually really helpful, especially the people that had lived through the civil wars. And that brings me a little closer to Ovid, because the actual kind of approved poets of the state would be Horace and Virgil. they are old enough that they saw the Civil War and that, like their families were broken from it.
Mhm.
We also have Livy. He writes prose, wrote history. Those three, their writing isn't as known as Ovid, despite the fact that Augustus was fully for these people and loved how much they kissed his ass. Um,
Of
um,
course.
yeah. Ovid was just a tiny bit younger than them. So he was a teenager when the Civil, like,
Oh
or
wait,
young kid to
before
teenager.
before we get further, before I forget,
Yeah.
the fact that the person you mentioned earlier being named Octavian,
Mhm.
this is for like Percy Jackson people. One of the most like everyone hates him character in the Heroes of Olympus series is named Octavian. And I'm like,
Reason.
Rick,
Yes.
Richard, like you're funny. You're so funny. It's so funny that people question like whether this his writing is any way accurate to the original myths and stuff because the more you know about them, the more like little in jokes you see that he makes that only people like him would ever even notice most of the time. Like that one.
Yeah. Um, Okay, so Augustus, as emperor, wants this huge religious reform. We're going to make Rome great again. So he starts rebuilding public monuments like crazy. Like he rebuilds 80 and starts building new ones. And the new ones have iconography that definitely has him and his family in it. And then he brings back some festivals and some religious ceremonies, some games, just kind of gets state activities going again. He also, people always put it as he revitalized the priesthood, but that's him stacking the priesthoods. He got all of these offices, prominence in Roman culture again so that he could put people into the offices. Um, and then he passed a bunch, or tried to anyway, pass a bunch of laws about morality. Now, the main goal of these laws, these morality laws, was he wanted more children born among the elite class in Rome. So the laws were a law against adultery, particularly women adultery. I'm pretty sure it's just women, but I only saw that in one source that they actually said women. So I'm like, wait, no, they didn't punish men. They definitely didn't punish men. I don't even need to
Absolutely
look at
not.
that.
Well,
But
before we go further, Fiction Fan 436 is talking about New Rome and Percy Jackson that people love because it is a city that like the demigods can live in and they grow old and things. But they're pointing out that New Rome gets a weird amount of praise for being a society that's hinging on nepotism. And that like the character of Octavian is so horrible because he has that nepotism and he can just do whatever he wants. And it's like, yeah, he's making a point about Rome. Like he tried really hard to make a point about Rome without being really obvious about it. Um anyway, keep going about make Rome great again.
yes, yeah. So adultery laws, which probably targeted women, saying no adultery, it's illegal. And that means that the state can persecute you if you are an adulterer. Men had to marry before they were 38, and couples were not allowed to be childless. I don't know what the age limit was on that, where they decided like you shouldn't be childless, but if you weren't married by 38 and you were a dude, you had to pay taxes. I'm guessing probably the same for childless couples. You probably had to pay more taxes. Um, let's see, and then there's like tax reforms and stuff too. I don't want to go into that because that's boring. But all of these
Math.
morality laws, essentially, there's no way to police that shit. There's no way to effectively enforce that, and that's where I think Ovid comes in. Now, let's see. I already said the part he was younger than everybody else. So he was young when the Civil War happened, and he didn't see Augustus quite the same way as these older poets and authors who thought that yeah, he is helping to revitalize Rome. Ovid's young and a little bit more removed. Plus, his family was wealthy, and they didn't really suffer during the civil wars. So he's removed enough that like he doesn't really care about the good he's doing. He's just kind of like, eh. um, let's see. Ovid as a person, his dad wanted him to study rhetoric and and practiced law. But after his brother's death, when I think he was in his 30s, he just was like, no, this isn't for me. And then he went off to Athens for finishing school. He went to Asia Minor and Sicily. But I feel like the Athens part I want to emphasize really quickly here because he
That's
went,
Greece.
as most people that were very educated and rich in Rome did, to Greece to go live and experience Greek culture, to read their literature, to learn their stories, to mingle with their people. So just saying, yes, he does like to mix up myths and add them together and create new myths, but he knows his Greek mythology. He studied it.
Yeah, he
So,
wasn't like a. It's not like there was like a literal wall between like Greece and Rome, or that they didn't interact with each other. Like they are happening sometimes at the same time. It's just like a weird way that people talk about it, as if it's like one did one thing and one did another thing, as if an entire society all agreed on one thing and just did the same thing for like thousands of years. It's like, no, of course not. And that's what's so wild about getting comments being like, you can only talk about Medusa this way but not this other way because that's Roman and not Greek. And it's like, it's the same person.
well, okay,
Like,
so I actually found this. I didn't know where to put this in, but there was a Greek author writing for a Greek audience about Romans. His name was Dionysius of Halicarnassus. And what he wrote was that Romulus, when he created Roman festivals and stuff, borrowed the best customs of the Greeks while rejecting calamities and blasphemy against them. He also wrote that Roman antiquities, or sorry, he wrote that um, Rome was like the better Greek religion because they took that blasphemy and calamity out of all of the story. Well, they didn't necessarily take it out of all of the stories, as we'll see with Ovid, because Ovid loves to critique them for that.
mm-hmm.
But they didn't really talk about those bad parts as much, and so he considers them more proper, like extra proper when it comes to piety in the religious sense. But like any society, there's critics. There's critics of religion. There's going to be people who don't believe the same things. Just as long as you practice the state festivals, you were good, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So, Ovid starts publishing after this period of travel. I believe it was the Amores, and then the Heroides, and then the Ars Amatoria. I don't know. I didn't go through every single one of his works. I kind of want to stick to three, especially. So, Ovid, it's kind of weird that we have this back and forth throughout history opinions about him, where you look at some like Renaissance artwork and you look at the myths that like inspire them. Think of the paintings like I'm thinking Danae with the golden shower, and
Oh yeah.
there probably is stuff of this Medusa stuff too. But like some of those Renaissance paintings hinge on his versions because they are very titillating. You know, the way that he writes, it draws your attention to the most exciting parts of whatever the myth is.
Mm-hmm.
And so people then took that and put that into art. And then you also have Shakespeare, who read this work and was inspired by it and wrote tragedies of a similar vein. Tragedies and comedies. I mean, similar to Shakespeare, Ovid was multi-talented in his ability to switch genres. So, anyways, three works that I want to focus on are Heroides, which that is the letters of women to men of mythology. And a couple of them are exchanges between women and their men. There's like an exchange between Paris and Helen that I've yet to read. But
Of course, because you like, if I'm gonna remember Calypso when I have dementia, you're gonna remember Paris.
yes, Paris is my number one hate. Yeah, so the Heroides, they're primarily, especially at the letters of a single woman to her hero, letters of women who've been left behind by their heroes or somehow like mistreated by them, hurt by them. So we have Medea to Jason after Jason dumps her for another girl. We have Ariadne. I always want to say Arachne for Ariadne. Those are the two names I always mix up in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Ariadne, she writes to Theseus just after, well, it's a little bit after she's left behind because she talks about how she felt when she was left behind. We have Penelope writing to Odysseus while he's gone and like everybody else has come home. Where the fuck are you? You know?
Yeah.
Um,
Like, bitch.
Yes. So, and it's not necessarily that nobody had done this before of taking the women's perspective from myths, but Ovid definitely was one of a kind in how he did it and making it such a big part of his work. So that one I think is especially powerful to people like us who like looking at these myths for that same reason. We like looking at the trauma in the myths because we are people with trauma and we want to talk about it and we want to find community and acceptance and, you know, like some sort of path from these.
Yeah, like to be honest, like the somebody was in my comments today being like, "Are you just rage baiting?" And it's like, no. First off, like usually people do that to make money, and I am not monetized on TikTok. I'm not even close to being monetized, so that's ridiculous to say. And especially right now with TikTok likely being gone soon, this is not the time to try to get monetized. You're probably not gonna get paid. But even if I was trying to like rage bait for attention or something, it's not that. It's literally just I want abuse victims to be like respected by people.
Mhm.
That's literally all it is. Like anytime I ever talk about anything, it's because I feel like a general fandom is doing things that makes that difficult to
Yeah.
happen. And it's not exactly my responsibility if when I do that, people jump down my throat and
Mhm.
they, you know, do all kinds of like just cognitive distortions at me to like turn me into a bad person or whatever. But that's literally all it is just centering like people talk about centering things. It's centering like abuse victims.
Yeah.
Those are the people I care the most about, especially younger ones that don't have a way to like really talk as much. But any of them. And so yeah, we're gonna like Ovid and his miss more than the other ones because that's who he writes about. When the
Mhm.
other ones are like, aren't the gods so cool though? And
Yeah.
like, no, they're not cool. They're horrible. and
Mhm.
and because that's what we're talking about. Like, if you want to hero worship the gods, that's fine. You can do that. Like us doing the opposite is not going to like make that impossible for you to do.
Mhm.
But it's just like if you're going to somebody's channels that talk about abuse all the time and child abuse and just like all these different dysfunctional things, why would you expect us out of everybody in the world to be like, oh, but the Greek gods are really great?
Mhm.
And I'm not going to say anything about all the horrible things that they do or like the reasons why they did them is because humanity does these things
Mhm.
and that's what they're there for. So it's like that's why we talk about this stuff. And maybe people get upset, but it's also a thing of like I know there's people like us out there.
Mhm.
Um, even if the one besides the people that have like, interacted with us in some way. I
Yeah.
know that the other people like that are out there anyway, even if they never say anything to us ever. And so it's like I want those people to feel like it's okay and that they can be interested in this stuff without I just remember so much of me when I was a teenager that I would really like something and then someone would say something or do something and I would just like feel myself not like it as much anymore.
Mhm.
Like I remember that happening with like Harry Potter back in the day when people would say that Harry Potter was like selfish for being upset at like the Dursleys and things like that or like how nobody noticed that like he was having to go back to his abusive family all the time
Yeah.
and things like that, or like how Ron's mom treated him and things like that. And so when I kept noticing that nobody else was noticing that, it just made me like step further back from people because I was like, these aren't safe people. And I want people like that to have a chance to find real like community, whatever they want
Yeah.
in these communities. And so we can do that because we're adults now and we can handle it, but it's like absolutely wild that every time we try, this is like the response that we get. And it's just like, how dare you put abuse victims first? And it's like, okay.
And I mean, Ovid giving a voice to these people that had trauma from these stories that were so well regarded during a period of religious reform does say something. It is political. It is a political message.
Mm-hmm.
I will concede that. But at the same time, it doesn't take away from how powerful the writing is, the fact that it's still so inspirational, and the fact that it really does seem like in a lot of places he gets it, like that he gets. And we talked about this like off and on with some of the epic stuff, and like with Madeline Miller, whether or not people truly understand trauma that are writing about it.
Mm-hmm.
And you do get a sense from him that he understands trauma and suffering. I don't necessarily know how much he faced in his own life, but the fact that he changed careers when his brother died tells me that something in his family was happening.
Yeah, like to be like to like sound crazy. There is a world where I would have been a paralegal and Mandy would have been a cardiologist.
Yeah.
Can you imagine either one of us doing that as a job?
So
Like
funny.
that's a crazy world to think about. I'm just like, what the hell? Um, but so every person that's a super creative person tries to do something that's really not what they want to do for a while to make other people happy, and then they realize like, what am I doing? And they and they stop doing that. But yeah, Ovid is just somebody that, I mean, just the Medusa myth alone, like you don't take that myth and be like, there's no way that she could have ever like actually given consent, considering that it was a god that she was with, and no matter what version of her you go with, she's never a god.
Mhm.
And so like I've seen posts of people being like, oh, she's the only person that consensually had sex with a god, and it's like, no, there can never, like, this is one of those like kind of big brain topics, I suppose, but there are some situations of consent where they are so off, like power dynamic wise, where there can never actually be consent, because no matter, even if you say yes, it's like there's too many other like power dynamic things going on where there's just no way that you can ever really fully understand like what you're going to be involved in, or the ramifications of what you're about to do could
Mhm.
happen. And like there's real life situations of that, of like, I don't can't think of like a good example right now, but just Medusa and Poseidon is a good example, I guess, is like even if she thought that she was entering into that, like she was doing that with a god, if she said no, like what would happen to her? And also like she doesn't know like kind of the powerful, very powerful people she's getting involved in,
Mhm.
and that she can't just like do that and then just like back out
Mhm.
and like leave. Like if she doesn't like being with him anymore, she can't just like leave because he's such a powerful being. And
Yeah.
so it's like you can't really fully give consent because you don't even understand fully what you're even consenting to. And so it's just that general idea of taking somebody like Medusa and being like, actually she wasn't this disgusting like dreadlock haired like snake woman who was really ugly and just like sat in a cave all the time, and like describing in a very primitive sort of way. She was
Mhm.
this beautiful girl that was turned into that by a god when they got upset with her for what happened to her because of Poseidon, because that would be more accurate, honestly, with powerful people. And I guess the overall thing we're trying to talk about with talking about all this history is that like you can't ignore who was writing these stories.
Mhm.
And so like when you look at like the Medusa story, like yeah, originally it was like, oh, her and Poseidon were fine and
Mhm.
everything was great, and then people just decided to kill her for no reason
Whatever.
whatsoever.
Yeah, she was by
Like
herself, not doing anything, not like seeking
yeah,
people out to turn into stone. I
even
I
like
do want to challenge it. Like, so the
mm,
Hesiod that everybody cites, where they're like, this seems consensual. All it says is that Poseidon laid with her, and I'm pretty sure the wording is Poseidon laid with her in a soft meadow. Now, soft meadow, people interpret that to mean something. Could it couldn't. I mean, you look at Persephone; she was literally ripped out of a soft meadow. So, like,
well,
um,
soft meadow to me, like the only thing I can think of is virginity.
yeah,
But that you can still like, there's a whole weird thing that men have about virginity sometimes. Like they want to sleep with someone who is a virgin because they feel like it's like the ultimate conquest or something. And so her being or being more virgin or like I don't know, innocent or something doesn't necessarily mean that there's consent either.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I would say that like, it's gray at best, just because we do know the other source material is a little bit off. It's like, okay, so, we can't say that that came out of thin air. Like, I really don't believe that. And I shut down one person in your comments. They never replied to me again by saying that, of like, well, obviously, Ovid studied in Greece, and he would have known the literature we don't have anymore, the oral stories we've never heard before. He would know those. So I can't say that he doesn't know more than me, a person who exists now and has never interacted with Greek culture in that way.
yeah, and the point that you were making there, which is a really good point to make, is that and this is like something overall that I like don't understand about Christians, about anyone from a like religion, I guess, but especially in this situation, these people, is that there's no way for you to know if what you believe is actually true because these myths were they're just stories that people told. Like there's so many stories like that that we tell to each other that like, oh, did you hear about this, or I heard this happen, or I heard that happen, or whatever. All those stories are out there. A lot of those things are online right now, so people in the future, if it doesn't get deleted by somebody, could go back and like read it all. But for a long time it was just told to each other out loud like that. And so like there's no way for you to know if the myth that you believe is actually the right one or whatever. There is no right one, but let's if you want to believe that there is a right one, there's no way for you to be sure that there is because you don't even know all of them that even existed in the first place. And
Yeah.
so like you can do that, but it's also a thing of like if you don't know for sure and there's no way for you to know for sure if the belief that you have is like the right and true one,
Mhm.
then why are you going around like talking to people in this very negative way, like talking down to people, telling people what they're allowed to believe and what not because of what you believe personally, if you
Yeah.
don't even know if what you believe is actually real or like actually happened or is actually true. That's
Yeah.
why it's like we're not saying that our way of looking at this stuff is the only way. Like we're we're never going to do that. But it's a thing of like I don't understand how people can do that and not like question themselves or be like, well, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong and I'm like running around the internet telling rape survivors for years that they're not allowed to like a Medusa myth because it's not in line with what I think the Medusa myth is.
Yeah.
Like I was afraid to talk about her for
Well,
years.
and I want to give the person who said it something, but they misunderstood what they were even saying. So you had posted somebody who said, like, of course we don't believe these literally, but it's not true in the way that they're trying to say of the ancients either. They didn't necessarily believe, oh, there's one true version of stories. These stories all intermingled with each other back then, too.
Hmm.
And, like, you could resonate with one, you could not resonate with another. All that mattered was you followed the state festivals. Like, I'm going to keep going back to that because there was no dogma, there was no church saying you have to believe in it this way.
Yeah,
Um,
and to
yeah.
like compare it to now, like that's like people who are considered Christian as long as they go to Christmas and Easter.
Yes.
It's like literally everything that Augustus did is the exact same thing. The leader that Ovid was writing these things about because Augustus was using the Greek gods and people's idolation of the Greek gods, and these mythical stories have been written about them by people in power, so they're written in a way to like look up to the gods as opposed to calling out the obvious issues that the gods were doing that was just like ignored because it's like, oh, but you can't be upset at them because we're in power and we don't want you to be upset at us. And so instead of that happening, it was like, love the gods. Ovid was like, wait a second, where I'm like a normal person and I'm watching this person use everyone's belief in the Greek gods to control them out of fear from ever doing anything against people in power because they're afraid if they do something against the person in power that the gods will strike them down. So I'm going to write these myths giving the power back to normal people. That is exactly like what's going on right now with Christianity, with the United States trying to like ban abortion because of what only a very small amount of Christians believe.
Yeah.
And just how like there are so many people right now that try to take back like Jesus as a figure and talk about him as like, oh, Jesus was Palestinian. Jesus was a brown immigrant that was undocumented, that was hiding in like a barn somewhere. And if
Mhm.
Jesus was alive right now, he would be arrested by ICE and be held at the border and things like that. And like that is what Ovid was doing by
Yeah.
writing these stories. And because people have wanted to, I'm not even sure what, with like how they've kind of tried to bring back this religion that really has nothing to do with us or like the United States, our society in any way. And they've decided to like try to like bring it back in some way. That's fine if you want to, but you're bringing it back in this way where you're like talking down about somebody that was trying to help normal people that in any other context you would like, I seriously doubt that in any other context, if there was a story like the Medusa story, where instead of it just being like, oh, it was consensual and she was just really ugly and horrible, like the original Medusa myth, there is no version where Athena is not just a terrible person.
It's true.
Because the original Medusa myth, they send people after her to kill the Gorgon. She's the only one that's like able to be killed because she's the only mortal one.
Mhm.
And so they go after her just because she's the only one that can die. And they're not doing anything. The Gorgons in any of these stories, they're not doing anything. They're
Never
literally
doing
like just
anything.
it feel even though there's like no definitive thing about it being like racially motivated, it feels racially motivated in the way that they're described and the way that they like live in a cave by themselves and they're not doing anything and the gods keep sending demigods after them to kill them anyway when they're not doing anything to anybody. Like yeah, they can turn people into stone, but they're not like attacking anybody. But like people go after them, they kill Medusa and they hear them literally screaming in pain because Medusa has been killed. And Athena is like, oh, I'm going to make a flute and make it sound like the noise of these Gorgons like screaming in pain because we just killed one of them. And I'm like, that is the nicest version of that myth. And that is still horrendous because you killed someone for absolutely no reason and then made an instrument to listen to the sounds of their siblings screaming in pain and grief when you killed their sister and then put their head on a sword on like a shield so that you could kill people faster. Like the only reason in that story that they killed Medusa is because they just wanted to kill people faster in battle. That's
Yeah.
not a good reason to kill an innocent person that you've never met before that's never done anything to you. And so like that's the nicest version of Medusa.
Mhm.
And so when you take that being like the starting point and then you end it being like a discussion of like consent and like Poseidon and whether he could have done that and how she would have felt like her like Medusa like the other person in the myth who's not the god, instead of it being about like Poseidon and Athena like throwing their power around, it's focused and centered on her, the normal person, and you can very much like empathize with her.
Mhm.
Like the Percy Jackson version of Medusa is such a great episode. There's so many articles and things like that written about that. So many TikToks got millions of
Oh,
views
well done.
of people talking about that because of how well done it was. Because you can identify and understand and empathize and sympathize with her even if you've never actually experienced sexual assault before. In the way that they present it, in it's just such a good way to present it because she's somebody that you can easily understand what she was feeling in that moment. There's so many people that have been involved with somebody in their life that had more power than them. They didn't realize that they were like caught in their trap until it was too late. And especially the way that in Percy Jackson she tries to warn Percy and
Mhm.
is like talking about his mother as if she's another victim of Poseidon and wanting him to like Medusa is the villain of that episode, but the main reason why she goes after the kids is because she doesn't think that the gods will ever do anything to help them, and she's like, if you're gonna choose to help the gods after everything they've done, then I'm just gonna kill you guys and save them time because they're gonna kill you anyway.
Mhm.
That's like the nicest way you can like present like her as like a villain in that episode really.
Yeah.
um Even she technically is, but not like that's a very anti-villainous thing that she really does even when she does try to hurt them. But it's
Yeah.
like that's a very empathetic story that centers somebody that usually doesn't get centered in that way, in especially in mythology, Greek mythology, whatever sort of stories. And so
Mhm.
like when you see that story, I generally like wonder like how people don't think about like why was that written like that, or like what made him change that
Yeah.
story, like what made him write that myth, what was going on where he felt like he needed to write a myth like that that put the gods as positions of power in their place and show that they're not these like good people, that they are hurting you, and by
Mhm.
making a story like that. And it's so weird to me how a bunch of people online that some of them say that they're trauma survivors, and I'm sure that they are.
Mhm.
It's not like I would ever disprove that, but they are championing a story by people that were basically the people that were abusing people in that time,
Yeah.
and saying that they're good people and getting mad at us for talking about the person that was trying to help people like them. And they don't even understand that. Like, I know that they, and I say that because I know that these people that are saying this stuff, if they understood it, I don't think that they would be doing this.
Well, yeah. Let's get back on track with Ovid really quick though, because I want to cover Ars Amatoria before I get to
Mm-hmm.
Metamorphoses,
Mm-hmm.
and like we'll do a funny part right now just to like make it a little bit lighter. But Ars Amatoria is was written after the Heroides, and it's a tongue-in-cheek kind of parody. It makes me feel like someone's, like parodying podcasters today who do dating like podcasts. Um, and he's talking about how to pick up chicks around Rome. Now, the reason I have to bring this up before I talk about Metamorphoses and before I talk about his opinions on Augustus is because this is most commonly cited as his reason for exile, is the fact that he wrote this poem. Here we have Augustus restoring 80 plus monuments all around Rome, and he's talking about picking up chicks at them. Some of his better lines were, he says anyone can be rich in promises. Just promise her anything and don't deliver. The more you don't deliver, the more she's going to keep giving because of the sunken cost fallacy. So just keep promising her shit. Um, let's see, be good at speaking to her, but try to appear like you're not good at speaking at all. So that way it takes her by surprise every time that you actually do open your mouth and say something amazing. And then, what was it? Pretend to wipe dust off of her lap. Even if there's not dust there, just say you saw some. She'll be really thankful that you were trying to keep her presentable. And then my favorite, which is, like we talked about the adultery law that Augustus had passed. Well, one of his pieces of advice was make friends with her husband. Like, let her let his let the husband have, like the best drink. Give him, a garland off your head. Um, let him throw the dice first. It'll make him more agreeable.
Yeah, Ovid is literally like writing an article for The Onion. Like that's like what this is like. I'm like, this dude is really funny.
Yeah.
I'm sure that this made the people in power so mad.
Yeah, like I said, the reason for his exile was always hotly debated because nobody knows for sure. No, like, and all that Ovid had said in his own writing was it was a Carmen, a song, and an error, a mistake. But he also specifies that it's not an illegal mistake; it's just kind of like bad taste mistake.
Mm-hmm.
And what people speculate it might have been because around the same time Augustus's granddaughter got exiled for having an affair is that he was in some way a participant of that. Like, I don't think he was the affair partner. He was happily married. His wife even, the form of exile he had, his wife and his house and his property was still in Rome, but he was forced into a different place. Actually, a former Greek territory. But yeah, so his wife, very loyal and took up for him to his death in Rome. I don't think he was the affair partner. So I don't know if he was thinking that she read The Art of Love and was like, this is it, or I don't know. It's all speculation. None of us know.
Honestly, it could simply be that he wrote that and put that out when this other scandal was going on, and
Yes.
because he put out this like parody poem about how to cheat on your spouse, it made people become more aware of this other like scandal that was going on in Augustus's family. And if he hadn't written that poem and put it out when he did, less people would have found out about like what was going on with his daughter. It honestly could be just a mistake like that where he put it out at the exact wrong moment and there was no way for him to know. And somebody like Augustus would be like, "You are banished because you made people find out about how I'm a hypocrite."
Yeah. So, and then he had to banish his own granddaughter. So, before we get to the metamorphoses, I do want to briefly talk about Virgil's Aeneid because that is a work that comes out before the metamorphoses, and it's kind of like the magnum opus of Augustus's reign. It's supposed to be, like his propaganda, so to speak, because Virgil, I love the Aeneid. I'm not shitting on it, but because the legacy was that Augustus was related to Julius, and Julius was descended from Aeneas. Well, the Aeneid is about Aeneas, and so it's basically like his love letter to the Roman emperor. In that he's writing about their past, their lineage, their bloodline, and so it takes us from them leaving Troy to them landing in Italy and having a war to get territory, I believe. And so those are the proto-Romans. He was praising Rome in that poem. He was praising Augustus's lineage. That's Augustus's favorite thing ever. Ovid doesn't know how to follow this up. Like, how can he follow up such a great work? It really is a great work. Virgil is also a very talented writer. And so I can't write an epic like that. What am I going to do? So he's like, I'm going to write this new thing. And it's going to be a collection of stories turned into one epic. It's going to be the story of the universe from its creation all the way down to Augustus, because he is also a god. And he's writing this partially while he's still in Rome, partially in exile in Tomis, again, a Greek territory. I just want to point that out again. And now I want to say, him making this a direct in-your-face insult to Augustus would not be smart. It wouldn't have been a smart thing to do. It's not supposed to be that. And that's also, and I don't think it's necessarily all let's shit on the gods, let's shit on Augustus. It's also partially, I feel like, calling in, because we have not just these stories of tragedy and of people being wronged by the gods, but sometimes the gods do help people. Sometimes the gods do have favorites. Sometimes the gods do good things. And when you're talking to leadership that claims divinity, I do think that that is a message, of like, yeah, you have the power to do great harm, but you also have the power to do great good.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, like when you look at the mythology stories in general, the way I always look at them is that the gods are representing different things in humanity that we always struggle with, which is why I think people always like the stories.
Mm-hmm.
And so a big part of that is trying to point out the like potential that
Mm-hmm.
gods like this have, where like they could do so much more to help people if they just tried, but they like don't try, and so that's frustrating. But people write stories like Rick Riordan wrote a story like that, and other people too,
Mm-hmm.
where they talk about the gods in that sort of a way to try to point out that like you don't have to be like this just as this is the one way we know of you doesn't mean you have to stay like this forever.
Yeah.
And the only way for like societal change to happen is if you kind of like challenge people of like what these people could be like just because this is the only way you know of them doesn't mean that this is the only way they can be. People can change. It's not easy, but they can change.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, yeah, why not like write stories like this to try to challenge people a little bit of like things don't have to be this way just because this is the only way you can remember them ever being.
Exactly. So it's called the Metamorphoses because the theme is metamorphosis. It's changing, and it's a lot of the stories do involve people changing from humans into plants, animals, stars, You name it, but not all of the stories have that. It does need to be said. It's just it's the tie that binds the because none of these collected stories have ever been put in a chronological order, so to speak. It was his way of just like, okay, shift, and then we have another metamorphosis, and then another one, and then it cycles again, and then it cycles again. Um, and also, it does need to be said because a lot of people accuse him of choosing like the worst versions or the most titillating versions. I have a special relationship with the story of Pygmalion because I was translating that the day before I gave birth to my son. So, my teacher had spent the class before giving me a lecture about this one line that I actually kept reading over and over again in this research, too. And it is essentially translated into his art is hidden in his own skill, which people say of Ovid, that like the art of what he is trying to say is subverted in all of these stories. Jupiter's supposed to be Augustus, yes, but you're not supposed to know how to feel about him all the time, you know? Um, so in the Pygmalion story, in the original version, in the Greek version, Pygmalion fell in love with the statue of Venus and had sex with it. You know, in Ovid's version, he is such a devotee to Venus that all of the women around just they don't measure up. You know, like there's no way he could ever be with any old woman because well, like ew, gross. They're not Venus. They're nothing like her. And he's also an artist. So he goes back to his studio and he starts building a statue. And he makes the statue so realistic and lifelike. He starts to believe like this actually feels like skin. Those veins feel like they're pulsing. Like he starts leaving it gifts. He starts talking to it, and eventually it comes to life. So like you go from like he took the most exciting version which was like the statue part, but he expanded it. He made it a beautiful story instead of just yeah, he fucked a statue.
Yeah, and it made it like more real, like or something that felt more like how could that actually ever happen
Yeah.
by making the person that sounds crazy in the original story feel more like human.
Yeah.
Um,
And
that's yeah.
Ovid's stories, what Dionysus, I think this was Dionysus of Halicarnassus that said it, but that his stories are closer to Rome than they are Mount Olympus, meaning that like they're more real to the people than they are, you know, this lofty thing that like is further away that you don't really, it's not tangible. And so I want to circle back. You had said it's important to know who writes this, and people have used that against us with this whole Ovid thing. But we are also saying that because we're not reading Ovid as religious text. We are not reading this because we are worshiping Medusa or Persephone or, you know, like any of the Greek gods. We are reading this because we are trauma survivors that have a podcast where we like to talk about human issues. And just like Ovid seemed very interested in human issues, a lot of these myths can center around human issues when you're not centering the gods' feelings and like putting reverence to them above storytelling, above, you know, like character development.
Yeah, like what I was saying before, just like bring that back. Like there are I know for sure there are podcasts that are done even by people who like Percy Jackson that talk more nicely about the gods
Mm-hmm.
and things like that than we do, though Percy Jackson is one where very purposefully they write the gods in the worst sort of way on purpose because they want to make that's like the entire like number one narrative of Percy Jackson is that the gods are always the villains no matter what is going on. And they're like if you can't understand anything else about that story, that is like the number one thing you should understand about that story, no matter what. And so there are other people out there that talk about it in a different way, but for us, the idea of talking of like having reverence towards like the Greek gods is just feels so wrong and like disgusting, honestly, when I think about it. Like that is so, and and by disgusting, it's like you have to remember the context of who we are as people, of why we would find that disgusting. Because if, and I guess the thing I've been thinking the last few days or so is like it's very easy to say that you support victims. Like this was an overall thing with the epic like fiasco too. It's very easy to say that you support victims, like you can just say that. It's another thing to actually do that. And so it's easy to say that you do, but it's harder when the things that victims are saying are like things that you don't like. It's very easy to do that when they're saying things that you agree with. Like when there's a victim saying like, "Oh, I liked how Epic did this song," or "Oh, I like how the Greek gods are depicted in these myths, and I don't like how they changed the Medusa one." Then yeah, listening to somebody like that is easy. But when there's people like us that are like, we don't like the original version, or we like this other version better because it fits more with our life experience and life story, and we're never going to like hero worship the gods. We're going to talk about how they're the villains because they're the abusive parents. And how else do you talk about abusive parents and intergenerational trauma and signs of grooming and issues of consent and all these sort of things when you are talking about Greek mythology, if you also can never show the gods as being the one at fault for things when they're the ones doing a lot of that stuff, or like creating systems where
The
those sort of things
problem.
can happen. And so it's like, yeah, for us, that's how we're going to talk about the gods, is because of that, because we're trauma survivors and we are making content for other trauma survivors that don't want to listen to people idolizing figures that remind you of the people in your life that hurt you. Um, that's who we're talking about. And so if you are a trauma survivor and you don't like that, there's nothing wrong with that. But also, if you show up in our videos or wherever else and tell us that we're not allowed to say that, that's just shutting somebody down because you just don't like what they're trying to say, and that's never an okay thing to do, like no matter what. Like we have never I've never I have seen videos from Epic the Musical people that I don't agree with at all, but I never say anything to them. I
Yeah.
just like leave it. I like sometimes when I see it, I'll like send a thing to you because I'll talk about what they're saying and things like that. But other than that, I don't say anything to them personally. I don't bother them. I would never say anything like that to them because they're enjoying something. Just because I don't enjoy it doesn't mean that they can't. And so when we do a podcast that is about using these stories as a way to talk about trauma and abuse in a way that makes it more easy to understand for people and make like trauma survivors maybe sound more empathetic than they can sometimes sound in like real life, when it's easy for like conditioning to not listen to us like kicks in and stuff like that.
Mhm.
um like that's what we're talking about. And so yeah, we're not going to be the ones that's going to hero worship the gods. And I
Yeah.
think that that's like a very logical statement or understanding to make. And so when we have people like on our backs like this, it's just like hard to like, I guess, see that and just be like, I don't understand why you are surprised by this, I guess. Or
Mhm.
like why we would need to, I guess it's like, you don't, I'm not asking you to explain necessarily why you like what you like. It's not until the other day when somebody said in my comment section that they don't take the myths literally, and I was like, you are the most literal people about these stories. What do you mean they don't take them literally? Like, so you've been just saying this stuff to us for all these years for fun? Because if it's not part of your religious practice, why would you talk to people this way? Because I just thought that that's what they believe, because that's what a lot of them say. And so I don't know anything about their religion because I don't practice it. I don't want to. And so
Mhm.
I'm not going to know anything about it. And it's like, I just don't get it.
Yeah.
I just don't get, I guess I just don't get like the point of it all, of treating people like that just because they have a different experience than you.
Yeah. I mean, we've never sought out to be a Hellenistic polytheist podcast where we teach you how to worship the gods. Both of us, I mean, I don't want to call myself an atheist because I wouldn't say I don't believe in anything. I don't know what I believe. I'm agnostic. I'm still searching. And I know like we're both spiritual people. We're just not like people that follow gods, like any gods. And
No.
so for us it's more about we try our best to be good people and to do as little harm moving through the world as we can. And like that's just what we do.
Yeah, and honestly, like ironically, I don't have religious trauma. That's like one of the only kinds of trauma I don't have. Mandy does, but I don't. Like my mom had us go to actually a really good church that was protested in the middle of the 90s because it let gay people go to our church and was very progressive. Like I remember in church them telling us that the stories in the Bible are just stories, they're parables meant to teach you lessons. And they would openly ask us during like Sunday school, like, do you think that these stories actually happened? And I can remember a time when I was like 8 or 9 when they asked us that, and almost every single kid in the room said no. Like, I don't think that this story actually happened. Oh boy.
Bluetooth connected to my phone when he was going out to the gym. Okay.
Okay, but yeah, what am I saying? Oh, that I remember when I was in church that day that they at one of the like the adult leader person asked the kids like, do you think that these parables actually happened? And
Mhm.
most of us said no. And he said like that he did, but everyone else basically in there didn't. And it's like they let us like talk about that and think about that and like discuss why if we don't believe that they're real, why they still have value and things like that. Like I was a like rape victim growing up, thinking that Mary was raped and that's why she said that there was no father for the baby, not because God was the baby's father, but because she was like raped by somebody because I was being raped, but like secretly by someone. And so I was like, "Oh, that's obviously what's happening here, right?" and and so like I was allowed to think like that inside my own head even though I never told anyone that's what I thought. I didn't realize that that was like different for a very long time because I just thought that that's what everyone thought, like a lot of kids do. Um, and so I didn't have like religious trauma in that way actually. Like I don't like a lot of like organized religious structures remind me of like my abusive family. Like it reminds me of my dad about how like these are the rules. You had to follow the rules, and if you don't follow them, something just absolutely terrible are going to happen to you. Like I remember being in high school and getting in this whole like discussion with one of my best friends about if hell was real, and I was like there is no conceivable way that hell is real. And she grew up believing that it was, and I was like why would God ever send you to a place to punish you for all eternity? This is obviously like a control tactic that somebody has made up to try to get you to do what they want. Like, and of course me growing up with my dad, I would be able to figure that out by the time that I was like 15.
Yeah.
Most people don't, but my point is that like I don't have all these like I don't have like a grudge against organized religion necessarily. Like yes, there's a ton of sex abuse in it, and so that's a problem with it in general of why even if I wanted to I would never be involved in it at this point. I don't believe in like a god in the way that it's usually presented. I believe that there is like something, but I don't look at it the same way at all as they do in like Christianity or honestly most of the other like major like religions. um but I don't think this stuff because I have like religious trauma. Even though Mandy has religious trauma, that's not what she's doing it for either. It's just we just don't we just don't care about we like the I guess like the main through line I'll say about our content honestly at any point is that we don't care that much about the people that are like in power. Like we don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about like why is this person in power doing these things, or like why are they acting this way, or how did they end up like that. It's like I don't care. I care about like the people that are being like affected by them because that's who we were, and so that's who we want to know more about. Like we don't talk about Luke for example because we're trying to like psychoanalyze and understand why he ended up that way. Like I think I can explain why he ended up that way, but I don't care about that. I would rather talk about like everyone else, literally everyone else in Percy Jackson, and about how he affects their lives as opposed to talking about him and
Yeah.
like talking about like oh he was traumatized. go away. if like if
Yeah.
the only way you talk about like people's trauma is to talk about just the abuser person's trauma, I'm not going to listen to a word you have to say. And it's like that sort of a thing of like if you're like, "Oh, you're upset with me because we're talking about the gods in a negative way." Like, how dare you do that to Athena? This is like a misogynistic like thing because it's hurting like the god of Athena. And it's like, what about the other women in these stories that Athena is absolutely atrocious to? Do you care about what happens to them?
Yeah.
Like, no, because you were fine with her making a flute out of their suffering. So you didn't care about women then. You only care about when it's her. And I think that's stupid.
Yeah, like there's um someone made a list and I will admit ignorance here, but I know someone made a list. There are actually stories of Athena in the Metamorphoses where she's not all terrible too. And so yeah, she's really terrible in Medusa and Arachne in particular because Arachne, she technically lost that contest if you read Ovid's version, and that's why she freaked out. And so, yeah, like she doesn't come out looking so great in either of those stories, but she comes out looking okay in other stories. So I think, and this is kind of like why people towards us gravitate towards the gods too. I think is like, because there's so many different versions. It's like you're allowed to play with them. You know, it's very much like not only do we know that we're allowed to play with them because we're people with free will, but because even people back then did. Even people back then would rewrite versions and twist it their own way. And oh, you know, I actually like this version from this story, and I like this version from this story. What if we combine those and turn it into one longer story?
And
And
I brought this up to somebody in my comments, and they were like, I have never read this, and I'm not sure if they were just lying to me. But this is fan fiction.
yes,
Like, if anyone has ever read fan fiction on AO3, like blend like multi like verse stories or like AU stories that blend like many different fandoms together happens in every single fandom. Like I went on a whole thing when I was unemployed last year for like 3 months of reading a bunch of
oh,
Percy
that's really
Jackson
fun.
fanfic of them in like the Marvel universe. Um,
That's the
and
most brilliant way, like to put. Like I had to stop you because that is the most brilliant way to put it. You have these state gods that they're taught how to obey and taught how to worship and stuff that they talk about all the time. The written stories are the fan fiction. Oh my gosh,
yes,
that's
it's
the best
all.
fucking way to put it.
That's why I think it's so ironic when Hellenistic polytheists are like Ovid wrote fan fiction. It's all fan
All fan
fiction.
fiction. Yeah.
It's all fan fiction. The Bible is fan fiction. Like every religious text in every religion is fan fiction because nobody is the one that wrote this. You're literally just making up an idea of what you think these beings or people or gods or whatever would be like. So it's like if Ovid is fan, it's all fan fiction. Like when people say that, I'm like, do you think that the gods are real? And like because you saying that oh he wrote fan fiction is like implying that like the literal gods came down to earth and actually told like the original leaders of the Greek world like what they wanted to write. That didn't happen when people
Sound
wrote the
like
Bible either.
you sound like fucking Christians.
Yeah, it's exactly what it is. It's like it's Christianity just like done in like a new place, and you can tell when people haven't uh, deconstructed. That's the word I'm thinking of. Haven't deconstructed Christianity because they're looking for the same things. They're looking for like what is the one story that I know is like the accurate, best, most wonderful one that I will follow to a T. The one that is the first one has to be the right one. And because it's the oldest one, that has to be the only version that's actually true. So I have to follow this. And if anyone else says this, then I can come to them and tell them that they're bastardizing my religious practice by believing a different story than I think is true. And I'm in my right to do that. That's just Christianity, just in a new place. Like a bunch of people don't want to be Christian. And so they remember enjoying learning about Greek mythology in school. And they're like, oh, I can just worship the gods. That will be fun. But they're doing the exact same like issues that are in Christianity the exact same way, and it's like maddening to watch them do it and for them not to be like aware that they're doing it. Like what is the point of switching religious practices, especially like we like referenced this earlier, but you're literally colonizing a religious practice. Like nobody on the internet right now that is in the United States particularly, and they're all like younger teenage kids, it seems like, or early 20s, that are doing this sort of thing. None of you have any connection with Greece or Greek mythology or anything to do with that, because the people that do are the ones that show up that are like, yeah, I don't think that it's right that people are telling you which myth to believe, because you can believe whichever one you want. There's so many different versions. Like why like whittle it down to just one? And like the person that showed up in my comments today that was like, yeah, there were cults in the time of Rome towards like one version of one of the myths and stories. So you can't exactly say that we didn't take it literally, because some people did. Because you can't put an entire like country of existence into like one small idea. You can't just say all of Rome felt this way, because there's so many people who lived there and they all felt differently. And so it's just that sort of an idea of like they you don't have any connection to Greek mythology or Greek culture or anything. And so you're taking something that you learned in school in a more western way, because these stories now exist around the world. They are told in like different like societal perspectives. And so you heard about them in school, you liked them and you connected with them. And so you're like trying to co-opt this religion that you have no connection to whatsoever for your own like thoughts and desires and meanings, which is fine when you're not using it to like be mean to people, but you're using it to be mean to people.
Well,
And so
yeah, I've explored Hellenistic polytheism. Every classic student probably does it at some point of like, what if I just worship these gods? And I will say, like, because you've said even at this podcast, I will never worship the gods. I haven't even said that, and it's not because I'm like going to, and I'm on the precipice of it, but it's because truly, I don't think that having criticism of how they appear as characters in literature affects my ability to see them as a mystical being or a powerful being that, I can show reverence to. I like to think, that spirituality should be a good thing. It should lead you to being a nicer person, a better person, a more understanding person. And I don't know, like, I do think there's versions of the gods where that can happen and you can have that relationship and it can be positive. It doesn't feel positive when you're doing almost the Christian thing of you have to worship exactly the right way. And if you don't, I have to correct you because I don't know, like you're almost acting Roman, bro, with doing that of like, if I don't correct you, the gods are going to be mad at all of us. And so we all have to get it right. Like, no, that's not how it works. Your religion can be personal to you. You can still believe it. And you can even enjoy stories about the gods while still worshiping them.
yeah, it's not like one thing or the other. Like we both love, like I love Medusa, she loves Persephone. So like no matter what, we love those things.
Yeah.
And we want like things involving them. If we had like unlimited money, we would just buy anything to do with them. And just have them and things like that, because we like what they represent to us in our minds. And so there's nothing inherently wrong with doing that, but it is like a weird thing to see people showing up in the United who live in the United States being like you're like being terrible to my religious practice. And the practice they're talking about is worshiping Greek mythological beings. And it's like it's just a weird thing to see, to know that like I don't think they understand that they're like basically colonizing an old religion that not a lot of people practice anymore. And so they feel like they can get away with it more because there aren't as many people there to like tell them to stop, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like they can't in like
Like
spiritual,
Western, so
yeah,
we
like
own it.
yeah,
Or,
like in spirituality spaces, a lot of indigenous people have rightly so like gotten their religious practices back after white people tried to co-opt it the same sort of way. And this sort of thing feels like that. Like you can like and enjoy the gods in different ways, but it's when you feel like you are like the arbiter of truth and justice about them, and you go out and tell other people how they are allowed to feel about them, that it becomes like this weird thing. And I guess I don't know, it's just been the one thing about this whole thing that I think is one of those things that would surprise the people that always bother me about this is that it wasn't until like people are like you they think that because I like the myth where she's raped by Poseidon that that's the only myth that I know. And in actuality, I didn't even know for sure that the Medusa myth involved rape until I got on TikTok in 2021. Like I remember the couple years before that that a friend that I had at the time would post sometimes about wanting a Medusa tattoo. And she had also been raped by somebody, and so I knew it had something to do with sexual assault, but I didn't actually know like what it really meant or like or anything like that, you know?
Yeah.
And so but so and I at the time I was like severely suicidal, and so I was barely even functioning at all. This was not the time for me to like go start looking up like a Greek mythology story like that. It was just like something in the back of my mind. And then when I got on TikTok and I started seeing videos about Medusa tattoos and then seeing people stitch those videos being like, well, and literally saying, well, actually, Medusa was never raped, so you shouldn't get a tattoo about that if you're a rape victim. And I was just like, what? And it was people making videos like that that made me look it up and like learn the newer myth because when I was growing up, the only myth I heard was that she was like the villain. And so a lot of people just assume that this is the only myth that I've ever heard. And it's like, no, that's just the one that I like. That's just the one that I like better because it fits my life experience. And
Yeah.
I like her and how, particularly, we haven't talked about this part of her myth yet, but the thing that a lot of, the reason why a lot of rape survivors or just sexual assault survivors like the myth of Medusa, particularly and like to get tattoos of her and things like that, is because is the idea of looking at her being able to turn people into stone as a good thing
Mhm.
instead of a bad thing. Like I've said this before, but I look at that as a good thing for me personally. That if I could turn somebody into stone if I was afraid that they were going to hurt me, then I would have a much easier time to like leave the house. And
Yeah.
part of the thing that was hard about the whole Epic the musical situation is that the reason why I didn't like that last song is that song very much like centered and showed the perspective of rapists and what rapists are thinking. And
Mhm.
that's why that song made me so upset because I don't think that is a worthy thing to put out in the spotlight. There's enough things out there already that aggressively show people what men who do that sort of thing think, and it just reminds you of what those people think of you, and it makes you scared to leave the house. And so when it comes to like the myth of Medusa, the reason why I like that one so much better is because it makes you feel more powerful. It makes you feel like you can handle it. It makes you feel like you can find some way to like feel safe again and get power back when you feel like you've lost all the power with like your own body and things like that.
Yeah.
And so that's the main thing of why people feel connected to her myth overall is the idea of like Athena thinks that she's cursed her, like in how they show it on Percy Jackson, for example. Like Annabeth is sitting there screaming at Medusa about like, no, this is like a bad thing. You're not supposed to be happy that my mom did this to you. Why are you happy that she did this to you? And it's like this whole idea of like Athena thinks that she cursed her forever. The gods think that they cursed her forever. Other people think that she is cursed forever because she can turn people into stone. But Medusa herself is like, no, this is great. Like
Yeah.
I love that I can do this to people now because nobody can hurt me anymore. And I have some sort of control back after losing all of it to these people. And like that's the thing about that myth that why people like it. And you can enjoy that myth and understand why people can like it, even if you yourself don't need that like comfort, I guess, to like leave the house if you've never been that afraid of other people before. But you can understand perhaps why people feel that way. And I guess that's just what I'm always trying to get across is like I'm not I'm not asking you to like just go with what I like or what we like or what she likes when it comes to Persephone or anything else just because we like it. It's more of just I want you to like look at a person and understand like empathy wise like why a person might feel that way even if it just makes you like stop for a second when you see somebody's video talking about that instead of knee jerk feeling like you need to tell that person that they're wrong because the way that people leave the exact same comment, no matter who they are, it's like they're not even thinking about what they're saying. Every single one of them just says, oh, that's actually Roman mythology, not Greek. Ovid wrote that because he was getting back at an emperor, and he was like trying to make the Greek gods look bad. And like,
Mhm.
I guess one part we can talk about with that is like, that is not why he wrote that, obviously. I think it, like, her going through the history shows that. And I think that, um, I know you mentioned propaganda, but
Mhm.
it's like, that is literal propaganda by, like, Augustus and the people in power to be like, oh, he wrote this story and I kicked him out because he was trying to hurt, like, the Greek gods or, like, the Greek society or whatever. And it's like, no, he was trying to hurt you, the person in power. He was trying to, like, humble you a little bit and have regular people look at you as if you're not like a deity, but like a normal person. And the way
Well,
that,
it was actually more of, if you want to be a god, this is the god. Like here they are. Here's your family, bro. And
and it's like wild that people are like, oh, he wrote that just to get back at like the Greeks. And it's like the only people that believe that there was like that there was like this rivalry between Greek and Roman people are people that were trying to get you not to like each other for some reason. And it just reminds me of when like our politicians are playing games like what has been happening the last couple months with China, and that it ended up like, granted they've been doing that for a long time with China, but particularly over the last couple months, and it ended with us going over to their app and talking to them. And like, I still am on Red Note, and I don't ever post anything. I like comment on other Chinese people's videos, but they still post things being like, foreigners, can you help me with something? And it's half the time it's us helping them with their English homework, which is really fun. But or it's just asking like a question, like, hey, what do you think about this? Or like, is this like a normal thing in the United States, or is this like propaganda or whatever? And it's just, we found a way to like communicate with each other instead of listening to our political structures that were telling us not to like each other. And it's the same kind of thing of like, yeah, the people in power might be like, don't like Rome, and Greece might be like, or Rome might be like, don't like Greece, because they want to like conquer each other probably. But like, regular people don't care about that. And so like, the idea that like a poet is gonna like write a propaganda poem like pro military like colonization. No. And that's like why I was saying like, you
well,
have to
no,
think about
that was
where,
Virgil. Virgil did that.
yeah, Virgil was like the propagandist that, and honestly, when I look at that, like, I can understand why Ovid came out with Metamorphosis when he did, because how else do you like counter somebody being an extreme propagandist, like propping up the man and like everything that is like
And well written
bad?
propaganda at that. He was like, "This is so good. Like I
Yeah.
can't."
And it's like, okay, this is really good, so I can't possibly knock this down necessarily in a normal way. So what if I just like write stories that are the polar opposite, almost like a reaction of what he wrote in a weird way, even though people probably didn't see it like that. Because how else do you kind of show the other side than to do something as like in your face as the kind of stuff that he was trying to do? But I guess it's just the overall idea that, oh, like all the Romans were really misogynistic, and that's why, and that's why we don't like their stories. And it's like, you can't put all of them in one box because they're an entire culture and being and people. In the same way that people who say, oh, the United, like when British people get on the internet and say like, oh, the United States doesn't use tea kettles, and we all like call them out for being idiots because you can't, we're a gigantic country, none of us all do one thing. We all use tea kettles. We actually invented them. Funny enough, like we invented the electric tea kettle. But even if you don't know that, we all can't all do one thing. Like we make fun of actively like foreign people who come to the United States and go to like one chain restaurant and decide that that's what everybody's food tastes like. And because it's like every single state, every single area of every single state is a different place, a different like almost country of its own. You can't just like put us all in a big box. And so like, why are you putting this very diverse, like very like culturally like significant society and culture of whether it's Greek mythology or Roman mythology into this tiny little box of like, oh, Roman people were all misogynistic. And it's like, how is writing a myth like Medusa or Ariadne misogynistic? The only way you think it's misogynistic is if you think that calling out the gods at all, or it makes it like bad.
Which I
And
mean, that is like, and Ovid faced that criticism in his day, right? Of like, you can't be this irreverent. But at the same time, like, who cares? You know, like,
well, it's also a thing. Somebody was in my comments today, and I ended up deleting all of them because they just like it was more one of those things of like this could be harmful for people to see. And it was somebody who admitted that they were Christian, and they were trying to tell me that me calling out religious leaders is always the wrong thing to do. And they were doing all of the like uh things that people do where they like try to shame you. Like a lot of people the last couple of days have been trying to shame me, and like I grew up with somebody who shamed the hell out of me. I know when people are trying to do it, and it doesn't really work that well on me anymore. But they were doing a lot of what people were doing is like, oh, why are you an adult like arguing with like teenagers? And it's like because you guys are talking to me.
yeah, like, am I just supposed to ignore your comments?
Like you're talking to me, or we're having a conversation. Like I am like a very one thing that was funny is I did a tarot reading on myself when I was just like bored when at work the other day when I didn't have anything to do. And one of the cards I got was Temperance, which is the card of like patience.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was talking to those people, and I'm like, I am the most patient, one of the most patient people probably on the internet. If I know that you're a kid, I am like very, very patient with you because you're a kid. You have every reason for being like emotionally charged, not knowing how to regulate yourself, not knowing how to calm down, or understanding what somebody is saying to you and taking time for you to understand what's going on because that is where you are like developmentally in your life. Like I don't have patience like that for adults because you should know better by the time you're an adult to not know how to react this way to people and talk down or badly to them. But like a kid, they don't know any better yet. They're still figuring that kind of stuff out. But either way, a lot of them were trying to shame me by being like, "Why are you arguing with a child?" And like the person that was saying you should never question religious leaders, they were like, "You are an adult. You should know better than this by now. You should like go to therapy and heal." And that's when I just like deleted all of her comments because
Oh, that's given
the
Drew.
the literal reason of why, because one of the things I was trying to bring up to her is like I was trying to tell her like I don't have any religious trauma, but I don't respect religious leaders because there's sexual abuse in basically every single religion by religious leaders, and it's covered up by the church and
Yeah.
like the different churches, the different religions, no matter what they are, it's always covered up to protect the people in power. And so I don't like it whenever that happens, no matter where it is. And they were saying like, oh, but they're basically saying that it's worse for me to talk openly about religious leaders doing things wrong than them doing those things that are wrong. And like I cannot state enough that that is literally the reason why abuse happens and permeates and gets worse over time. And like this person was saying that they went through things that was hard when they went to church, and it's like this is why that happened to you is because you feel you're talking to somebody who you know went through horrible trauma, and you are mad at me for bringing that up that makes religious leaders look bad over what the religious leaders did that was bad. Like you're more upset at the person bringing it up than the actual thing that that other person has done. And that is why people in positions of power are able to get away with it for generations, and why it gets worse and worse over time. Because if you have the idea that it's always wrong and bad whenever anyone talks about it, they're never going to have to deal with it, and they're just going to keep going. And it's like this is like a real life issue. Like if people on the internet are like having a hard time with me talking about fictional characters,
Yep.
like fan fiction characters essentially, and like if them in the different stories about them makes them look like abusive people or not, how do you react to people who you might know in real life who will like say that sort of thing if it's somebody that you already like? I have a hard time thinking that you will actually listen to them, because if you won't listen to them about fictional people that aren't even real, how are you going to listen to them when it's somebody that's actually standing in front of you? And that's the stuff for me that why I talk about it, why I feel like it's important, is because um, people that go through abuse, we hear all of that stuff. And when you say that kind of stuff about other people, we know that we're never going to tell you anything. Like, I can remember doing that with friends when I was growing up, that they would say things about Harry Potter because that was like the popular thing at the time, and he was an abused kid. And
Yeah.
so when they would say things about him, saying that he was whiny or spoiled or other words like that, or he doesn't have I don't like that he's so angry. Um, I literally remember thinking in my head, like, I'm never telling them anything that my dad does to me because they're not going to believe me.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I know that you guys don't want that to happen, but that's like what happens. And so these like discussions that people have about like the Greek gods with us, they they don't live in a vacuum. Like, if you have those opinions about this, that might like bleed over to other parts of your life. And you're likely isolating somebody in your life that you don't even know that you are right now. And so when I have kids talking to me, like, if for no other reason I can just get them to calm down enough for them to like think more about what they're saying,
Mhm.
then, and instead of just like reacting like they feel like they need to defend something, then it's a success. And
Yeah.
it's fine if they block me afterwards, because I know, at least I know that they're thinking about what I said, because I remember people like that who said things like that to me about my dad when I was growing up, and I thought about the things that they said for decades. And it
Yeah.
always bothered me that I couldn't think of a way to like neutralize what they said about him, because part of me knew that what they said was true. Um, and I guess that's why this kind of stuff is like important, or I feel like necessary, because people are like, why are you arguing about this stuff? This stuff doesn't matter. And it's like, yeah, it actually matters a lot. Um, these stories are reflections of society. And especially right now, um, with everything going on in just the United States right now, seeing a bunch of younger kids defending somebody who is just a horrible, that was exactly like Trump, doing the exact same things that Trump is doing now, like talking about like family
I won't
and
say exact same, but they seem like they are very reminiscent of each other.
yeah, they're very much like the same kind of like hypocrites, and like weaponizing religious beliefs to make
Morality.
people become like more all like rah rah Rome, when people aren't happy with Rome because of like ineptitude in like leadership and things like that, instead of like turning it around and finding a way to like make them like them again. It's the same sort of tactics, just all over again. And so when I see a bunch of like younger kids that shouldn't, that for all intents and purposes, considering like what has happened in their lifetime, I wouldn't think that they would, that's who they would be going for, but they're going for that because of how people have described these gods in Greek mythology, and them not thinking about them any further. It's just like something that I think is worth to like challenge of, because the gods are there as like a narrative idea to talk about the issues that exist in society. Like, they are always around because those problems are always there.
Mhm.
They they just kind of change as we change, but oh, the one thing with this I wanted, that you brought up, that I wanted to make sure to say, is that you brought up the idea of like, if you believe in like worshiping the gods, um it's kind of, it shows the like the Christianity of it, that you don't, that you think that the gods are real to you in some way, but you don't want people to make new stories about them.
Yeah.
And so it's like, so do you think the gods are around now, where you can like communicate with them and worship to them and do like divinity with them? Because if they are, then they would have opinions about what's going on in the world now. They would be somehow affecting the things that have happened in the world since like Greek and Roman times. But you're telling people that they're not allowed to make new stories and new myths about them. So it's like, so do you think that they're still around in some way for you to connect to, or not? Because
Mhm.
it's like, which one is it? Are you like teleporting back in time to talk to them in like ancient times when you communicate with them, or are people allowed to like write new fan fiction about them? Um, you have to choose which one it is, because those are contradicting statements. But I think it's one of the things that shows that they're just not thinking that much about what they're really doing, because they don't, I don't think they realize that those two things don't like make sense. They're just thinking like, well, the Bible was written thousands of years ago, and that was the original story, and there aren't any more. And it's like, yeah, because he was murdered by the government.
Yeah.
That's why there is no more stories about Jesus, because he was literally murdered by the police. And like so um but in this situation, like, the Greek gods are not, they're immortal. And so if they are real and you want to connect to them, they would be still around. And so, like, why not write new stories about them that would just make their stories last even longer? Like,
Yeah.
why say that you can only like the stories that are from thousands of years ago in societies that are not the
Just
ones that we
boring.
live in now?
So boring.
Yeah, it's just weird, really weird and boring. And I think it's funny that the thing they say is like, "Oh, you're basing what you think about Greek gods on Percy Jackson,"
No.
and it's like, "Oh, I like Percy Jackson, but uh, the stories that I like in Percy Jackson are because I like, that's like what I like about, I like how he describes the gods, is the best way to put that. Is like, that's what I think about the gods. Like, I can remember when I read the first book for the first time being so excited about the fact that somebody was writing a story where the gods were the abusers, because they would be. And I was so excited to find a story that where they weren't the main characters, that their like victims were. I was like, "Oh my god, this is the best. This is the best thing ever," because most Greek mythology stories, the gods are like more the one that are the main characters. And so, like, that's why I like it. But like, the stories and the myths and stuff in those books are accurate. Like, Rick Riordan taught Greek mythology um, in school. Like, he right now on Blue Sky every single day is posting every day about like an obscure god that most people would not know, as like a fun way to just continue doing that. Like, he's always trying to be like a little teacher in some way.
That's
And
so
so,
cool.
like, he that's why I like the, it's not because I read Percy Jackson and I think that's what the gods are like. It's because I that's what I thought the gods were like, and his interpretation matches mine. Um, that's a very different way to look at it. And I guess the last like Percy Jackson related joke I'll make about this is that if you are a Hellenistic polytheist who thinks that it's either Greek or Roman, never ever read the Heroes of Olympus books.
Oh my
Never read the Heroes of Olympus books, because the entire plot of those books is that the gods are like having basically like mental breakdowns where they can't help any of them with anything, because they're aware of like the two sides of their body. It's like when you have dissociative identity disorder and you realize that you have associative identity disorder, or you have dissociation, where you're suddenly aware of like the different parts of your personality. Even like me doing like internal family systems work is like that, where I can recognize the different parts of my personality from like the different experiences or ages that I was when those things happened to me. It's
yeah.
literally like that, where they like are realizing like the Roman and Greek versions of them, and they keep like switching between the two versions. And so the kids can't get any help from them, because they're just like falling apart, because they're aware of the two sides of them when they usually are not. But like, it's one god. It's one god, just the two versions of that one god. And so like, Poseidon is Poseidon and Neptune. There isn't like a Roman version of him and a Greek version of him. It's him, just like the two like sides of his personality almost, that he's having forced to becoming aware of in that book series. And so like, if you get this mad at us for talking about, for being like, yeah, the Greek version says this, but that's also connected to this other version, you can't separate the two of them. That entire book series is about Rick Riordan writing an entire series that's based on the gods like literally splitting apart,
Mhm.
because they are like every version of them. There is just one. It's just the different versions of them, but they're all the same person.
Yeah.
And so like, you would go into like, you would start like hyperventilating if you
Yeah.
read that book series. So maybe skip it. Maybe
And to
just
be
skip it.
especially clear, we're not saying this is canon and the Greeks believed in it. We're saying Rick Riordan wrote it.
Yeah, and it's more just a thing of like, he's somebody that has, like I said, got it like a certificate at the time, but that was the education needed at the time in order to teach Greek mythology. You can't really like question whether he knows anything about Greek mythology, because of all the different blogs and posts and things like that that he's done. Um, Even outside of his stories, just like the things that he just posts, just in general about mythology, just for fun, because he likes to talk about it. And so like if he's able to understand that it's one the same one God, just like different depictions by different people, then yeah, if somebody who has a degree in that understands that, then it's not going to be as easy to I guess stay so like Greek versus Roman, and it's like no, it's just both.
I just think it's stupid. Like,
It is stupid.
yeah, and I guess that could be our conclusion, but like, I wanted to cover the Augustus versus Ovid thing just to kind of like actually wrap it up because I don't think that the people who are so, oh, Ovid is awful and he's propagandist and he's just anti Augustine would really love Augustus. And also, we are not a source for being a worshiper of the gods. We are a source for talking about the many stories of them, as well as Avatar and Percy Jackson and Star Wars and anything else our hearts desire.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Anything that we consider mythology could be like almost anything at this point because it's all
really
stories.
anything.
That's like what we like to talk about, and yeah, it just seems silly to. I just hope one day that people stop doing that with these stories, with especially with the Medusa story, because it's just really hard to be on the internet anyway as a survivor of anything like that, because people don't want to listen to you, and there's just a lot of stuff around that is like hard to see, that's triggering to see, and
Mm-hmm.
so the literally absolutely 100% the last thing on planet Earth that any like rape survivor needs to see is some like teenage kid telling them that they're not allowed to like the thing that makes them feel safer because of how they feel about it. It's just nobody should be posting on the internet about how they got a Medusa tattoo and being like scared of how people are going to respond to you because you did it, or like just talking about it. You should be able to talk about that without being worried that somebody's going to show up and tell you that you're not allowed to think that way.
Yeah.
That's just not some. And like I said, I don't think that these people would ever talk about to rape victims that way any other time.
No.
And so like the thing I was trying to say to like end this thing on was like this podcast, whatever you want to call it, is like I don't. We both have a hard time of like being like, yeah, we're good people. Like we don't we struggle with that a lot. We're very hard on ourselves, and we tend to yell at each other about when we're hard on ourselves, but we're hard on ourselves while we're also telling the other person to stop being hard on themselves. But so this does not come from like a place of like ego at all, because we don't really have a lot of that going on.
Yeah.
Neither one of us, but we are we are making this podcast thing in an effort to make kids that were like us growing up realize that they're not alone, and that there are other people out there that went through the same thing. And if they want to listen to us and feel like at least some people understand them, then
Mm-hmm.
that's good. That's what we want to do. We want to help people that were like us growing up, because we remember not having that many people that understood us at the time.
Yeah.
And so if you see people doing that, like their entire like platform is trying to help people understand abuse and grooming, and help people that are going through it right now feel like they have a place to go where they won't get judgment. If you see that, and because of like a religious idea you've decided on, or like just something that you like, you decide that we are bad people,
Mm-hmm.
that is something you need to think about, of like, is this religion worth it if this is how I'm acting when I'm doing it? Like, I don't say this stuff to be like we are amazing people and we're saving children or anything like that. I'm no, I no, but no matter what you think about us, if you see what we're doing and you're like you are bad people because you don't agree about Greek mythology with me, when you can clearly see what we're trying to do because we don't hide it, like
Yeah.
that should stop you. That you see people trying to do this sort of thing, and it doesn't stop you from being like, is it worth it for me to like try to silence this person just because I don't like what they said about whatever it is that we've said?
Yeah.
Like I don't think that it's worth it. And it's like I just don't think that it's worth it. Like are you going to talk to the people that we talk to? And if we don't do it anymore, like are you going to do it? Because otherwise We
I
wouldn't do
love
it if other people would do it, but they don't do it, and so we do it instead.
Well, yeah, and we love finding those people. We love finding the community. That's why we're using these stories, is because we have found that people like us tend to find these stories as well.
Hmm.
And so we're using that shared starting place to talk about these bigger issues.
Yeah, and a friend of mine was I did a bunch of posts about Song of Achilles, and a friend of mine was like, you know, I'm glad in this moment that I never read that book because I think that I would have stopped reading it many times. And I was telling her like, yeah, if we weren't reading it for this, we would have stopped reading it too. Um, but it's worth it to talk about because Madeline Miller's a good author, and but more importantly, this book is us an excuse to talk about like, you know, male victims and weird homophobia, like, but while thinking that you're supporting gay people, and and like kind of like misogyny, not in an obvious way, or like female abusers or sex trafficking. And so it's like it's worth it to talk about this book even if we're not like this is the best book I've ever read, because it gives us an excuse to talk about these ideas and stuff like that. And so like that's what we kind of use this stuff for.
Yeah, well, and that's a good transition too. So we could
Hmm.
transition to Song of Achilles, because we are still reading it. We're halfway through. Where's my copy of Song of Achilles with all these stupid books around? Yeah, so we are getting so close, like more
my
than halfway now.
my
And
Kindle copy says that we're 70% done, and when I was reading these chapters I was like,
it was
I
such a lot of fun.
I feel like these are like the chapters before all of the emotional stuff starts happening.
That's what I'm getting wind of too. So to kind of catch people up to where we're at, they're already in Troy. They have started doing a bunch of just I can forget the word for it.
Raids.
Raids. Yes, they haven't done actual fighting. They're going to all the surrounding cities. Troy is a citadel. It's literally they're surrounded by walls, and so they get a lot of stuff imported. So basically, this is still strategic. They're kind of like wiping out all of the people that could possibly help them get resources and support elsewhere. But at the same time, the Greek men, as we are reading in this, are growing restless because they're not fighting actual soldiers. They're fighting villagers and farmers. Yeah, so that's where we pick up, and um, people are very, very, very just like tired of everything. Let's see. Hold on.
This I won't lie, like these chapters were hard for me to read because I
Yeah,
don't care about battle or
yeah.
like this like
They're very battle heavy chapters.
it was weird to read like, so what we were saying like last time about how them starting like their little like troop of child like sex trafficking victims and making them like their little sex trafficking school where they can learn like broken Greek and things like that was just it felt very not real because they're in like this world where the bunch of men are there, like men would go over and challenge them and try to take these girls from them and things like that. And so it was kind of odd in this chapter where you see some of that stuff start happening, but not with them, but with everybody else. And so in this chapter, there was a lot of stuff about them being mad at like Agamemnon for being like, we've been here for 4 years and nothing's happening. We haven't won. You said that this would be like a short battle and we've been here forever. I want to go back home, and things like that. And it's like, it was odd because it felt fake to me in a way. Even obviously it's a story, it's fake, but like it's when I can like notice the like writing like decisions that an author is making, it kind of breaks like the wall in that way where you're not able to see it as like a natural progression. And like since in the last chapter there wasn't any of that kind of stuff happening with Achilles and Patroclus when there should have been, it now feels like forced to me that it's happening now with like everyone else, even though it fits in line with like the myth and the
Yeah.
stories and things like that.
Well, and
It
I
just is
wrote
weird.
that. Like, yeah, so one of the first things that happens in these chapters is a conversation about Helen herself. And one of the things that I wrote about it was this feels out of place, but in place at the same time somehow. Like,
It
you know, it fits with the mythology, but at the same time, it doesn't feel right.
There are these moments in this book where Madeline Miller is like, "Oh right, I'm writing a Greek mythology story," and she literally just like I can literally feel her like info dumping, just like information that she's like read from like research that she's done because I was reading that like conversation, but it didn't even feel like a conversation. It more felt like they were like the avatar to explain to the audience all the different theories that people have about why the
Yeah.
Trojan War started in the first place. It didn't feel natural for them to be talking about that. And so I was just like, this is interesting. But when we got to the end, I was like, okay, well, that's one way to tell the audience all the different reasons for why they think the Troy War started
Okay,
and
yeah. So
lasted so
to
long.
catch people up, so the reason they're talking about Helen at all is because King Priam, the king of Troy, has finally called for a parley. He's put up a flag that lets them know, hey, you can send somebody into the walls and we'll talk it out. We'll see if we can come to a peaceful resolution. And so Achilles, as this is happening, starts asking Patroclus, do you know why she chose him, Menelaus? And, you know, he reiterates, I don't remember much about it at all, didn't know anything about her, but I'm pretty sure people were saying her sister was already married to his brother, so maybe that's why. And then they start discussing, do you think she left on her own? And I mean, we do get information here that isn't so prominent in the myths. Like Menelaus's palace is like a fortress. If she had struggled or cried out, someone would have heard. We do know that there were like servants and stuff present when she left, but I believe the version of the story I'm most familiar with, anyway, is that Menelaus had to leave while he was hosting the Trojans, and then they took off. So like the servants knew, but there was no man of the house there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and so they're talking about it. They're saying it doesn't really make sense that she didn't go by on her own. Like somebody would have said something, somebody would have done something. Um, Maybe she's really in love. Maybe Aphrodite made her, which of course is the mythological reason that this happened. And they're trying to wonder, is she going to come back with them at the end of this parlay? Because remember, the whole reason this war is happening is because Paris took Helen with him. And now everyone's saying she's the prettiest girl in the world, not just the prettiest girl in Greece, because she's gone to the east. And like we have to get her back, or you know, we might still fight even if we get her back, but we can talk it out at least. Yeah. So, but then we get this moment at the end, and this is where it's like, okay, this is so out of place because I get that you want a cute little Achilles Patroclus moment thrown into this conversation because they're talking to each other, and you don't get them talking to each other a lot. But they wouldn't like. Okay, so what happens is Achilles asks because his initial question was, "Why did she choose Menelaus?" He asks, "Would you have chose him?" Like, or which of the suitors would you pick? And I'm just like, really? Like you think Patroclus would have this grand host of suitors after him that he could choose from? Like, okay, no one would have said this. No one would have said this. Not even jokingly.
No.
Yeah.
And also, like, Patroclus didn't even think about people like that before he met
No.
Achilles. Like, he didn't think about anything, like, romantic or anything like that in any way. He was like, nobody would ever like me. So why would I think about that? And so it was just, it was like, I know that it was a way for her to try to, like, add something in so it doesn't feel like she's just info dumping information about the story in a way that they just like she just has to because there's no other way to like get that information across to the reader if you don't know that already about like why the Trojan War was happening the way that it was because of honestly the huge like jump in time. Like they went from them first getting to Troy for to them being there for 4 years, and so they have to have that conversation somewhere, I guess. But yeah, it just felt it just feels weird. It's just
It feels
weird.
weird and forced. And so they sent Menelaus and Odysseus for the parlay because you're supposed to send two men in. They made the most sense because Menelaus is the husband, Odysseus is the rhetorician, whatever the word is for that. And so you got your speaker, you got the guy who's the actual hurt party. You go in, he defends his cause, but they very quickly find out that it's not going to work because the Trojans feel like they also have an ironclad reason for not giving in, which is this woman doesn't want to leave. So we're protecting the woman. And Odysseus says, I see, like, we got nothing else to discuss here, so we'll leave. And they do leave. When they come back, Agamemnon's like, all right, the fight you all have been waiting for. So every single man has to get in there and fight. Now, Patroclus has gotten away with not going on these raids up until now. First day, he has to go on the battlefield. And it is a shit show because he's reliving his trauma of accidentally murdering a boy. And it's a whirlwind of clanging of shields and swords, people screaming, guts, and blood on the ground. And he notices Achilles just happens to be everywhere all at once, and that's the only reason he's not getting hit.
Yeah, and uh, the like trauma victim side of me, with like a dad like Patroclus' dad, I was annoyed by how scared he was all the time because I was like, this doesn't feel real to me just personally because when you have somebody like that in your life, you have a lot of rage,
Yeah.
even if you never like let it out or you only let it out on yourself, like the way that Patroclus usually does on himself, like I usually do on myself, you still feel that a lot. And it's really fun when you have like an actual good reason or excuse to like let it out on somebody.
Yeah.
Whether whatever it is, like me playing sports was doing that. Like you're allowed to be aggressive when you're playing sports, and so I would do that and have fun. I wouldn't go like too far, but still, you get the idea. And so I was reading this, I was like annoyed because I was like somebody who actually had a dad like Patroclus's dad. He would have a lot of internal like rage that he would want to let out on people. And this is like the perfect chance for him to actually be able to do that for once in his life. And so the fact that he was just instead like absolutely terrified, and that was the only emotion he felt was just like terror. And that terror, one of the things that happens when you're terrified like that for a long time is that you that eventually turns into like rage because you get so angry of being so scared all the time that you just start fighting back because you just want it to stop. And so the fact that that never happened to him, I was just like, that's not how we actually act, though. And that's only something that you would know if you actually necessarily went through something like that or knew somebody who did, I suppose, who actually would explain something like that to you. But that bothered me just because I was like, he would have at some point gotten angry and wanted to protect himself. And it was also annoying because of the Patroclus and like Achilles dynamic, that like Patroclus is this like low person that's like terrified all the time, and Achilles is just like running around him defending him all the time, that like he literally can't do anything
Yeah.
on his own. And because I know how this story ends with Patroclus, I'm like, you are doing this on purpose and I don't like it. It feels like very obvious to me that like because what he how he dies and what he does, that she's making him so like weak and so scared of doing that to make that like a much bigger moment than it even already is. And I'm like, stop it. Like let him get mad and like fight one person without crying all the time. You can do that without, you can the how he dies will still be like a huge moment even if he knows how to fight. And so that's what that stuff reminded me of. And
He's
it
not
just,
Achilles. He can't stand up to Hector. Hector's the best Trojan fighter. He can be a fighter and still die in that battle.
yeah. And that's what that stuff bothered me because I was just like, I can like see the narrative literally that's forming, but I don't like that because it just feels like, I don't know, I
It
just
feels
don't, it
wrong.
just feels weird to like see that happening in that way.
Yeah, and I mean, that's even forgetting survival instincts. Like you're literally in a survival situation there, and you're telling me he has zero survival instincts. Like he's not even able to pay attention enough to protect himself.
Yeah,
Like,
and I will say the number one thing that people in traumatic childhoods with like violent, especially parents, excel at is survival. We can survive anything, literally anything at all. It's never a it's never a question of will I survive this. It's like I know I will, but it's like how I will, or like or being tired of the fact that I have to.
yeah,
And so it's like we can like put up with things that most people would never like ever like put up with or want to deal with because we're just used to it. And so that's like kind of what I was trying to say of like why I didn't like that he was so terrified all the time, and that's like the only emotion that he has really. And I did like when the fight ended and he eventually started doing other things, but because that felt more like in line with him anyway. But it was just hard, I guess, to see this like narrative forming of like Achilles is the big strong guy that's gonna like save him from having. And it's also the whole like weird morality thing that it feels like Achilles is the one that's gonna do literally all of the killing, and Patroclus is gonna do like basically none to like keep him more like innocent almost, so that the moment when he does do something it feels like an even bigger moment. And I'm like, will you just stop doing this? Like
yeah,
it's I don't want to think about the things that I when you have a story like this where you kind of know the ending. I like stories that like make you forget what the ending is. Like I'm trying to remember Titanic.
yeah,
Whenever I watch the movie Titanic, everyone knows what happens, but you get so like engrossed in like the characters and the story and everything else that's going on that every time you watch that movie, you like forget what's going to happen until it starts happening, and you get upset and sad all over again at the end of the movie. And it's like, why am I sad? I knew what was going to happen. Why am I crying? I knew that this was a tragedy. But it's because you get like wrapped up in the characters and the story that you forget about like what you know is going to happen. It makes you forget. And like that's why this stuff was bothering me, because it's making me remember what is going to happen later. And I wish that it wasn't quite as obvious, I guess, in that way, because I don't want to think about that now. I want to not have I want to forget about that completely until it naturally happens in the story, and then I start crying a lot.
yeah. Well, and so we get not only Patroclus being extremely scared, but we get another savant moment. We get another Achilles is he is autistic with special interest in martial arts. You know, like that. That's like kind of the vibe he gives, because as he's fighting, they're saying he feels like he's truly able to like fight up to his speed, and it's not because of the one-on-ones. It's not even 2-on-1. It's not even the 3-on-1s. It's when he has a horde of people rushing at specifically him, and he's able to take out like 20 at once, that he feels like he's finally able to flex those like god genes and be himself. Um, Crazy, real like it was very much giving Savant, and I didn't like it.
Yeah, especially since, like we said before they went to the Troy War, he never fought anyone ever. And so like the idea that the first battle he was ever in was like the Trojan military, and he somehow beat all of them even though he's never even fought another human being before. It's just like, okay. Like I know that the gods are like the gods, but can we like reel this in just a little just a little
He
bit?
just needs he need to train to get his skills up to the god level at least a little bit. But anyways, so as Patroclus is staring at him and marveling at him, even though he hates the death, he starts noticing that there's like this bright light in a square around him, and he's not getting much blood on himself either. But like when he really focuses, then there's a woman, a tall woman, and it's like, oh yeah, that's Venus. I knew it right away as he started saying it. And he notices Venus isn't helping him. She's just there. She's just there keeping his clothes clean, or keeping her own clothes clean, and having this bright light around him. She doesn't need to do anything is the implication. And so it's interesting because I kind of get the feeling she's trying to show us here's these two people that can't seem to get along but really love this same person like the same way and are equally in awe of him at this moment. But then she ends it with, and then Venus hisses at her, hisses at him, and like leave.
God.
Yeah, so weird. Okay, so the last thing I kind of highlighted in this as like because it's just a bunch of fighting in this first chapter. It's their very first battle. Is that he gets a first glance at Paris, and he notices that Paris is actually a really pretty dude. You know, he's dressed really nice. He's kind of carelessly throwing his arrows about. Sounds about right. I fucking hate Paris. You're right. You know, just thinking of this pretty boy while he caused all of this. Yeah, no. Get off your fucking chariot and do some work with a sword, kid. Anyways, he notices that, but then he also notices Hector again. And it's interesting. I love the way that, because, you know, as much as I hate Paris, I fucking love Hector. I would leave Jake for Hector in a heartbeat if he was a real person. I'm just kidding. Like, but no, this is the Hector that I fell in love with. And it is, he notices that when he stops to pray to the gods, he's like wiping off his hands and making sure he's clean. That this man just still seems to be so like awesome and good and reverent, despite the fact that he's fighting. And you know, we end the chapter with like a throwback to Achilles, his line that he keeps feeding Agamemnon every time Agamemnon's like, when are you gonna enter single combat with Hector? He says, what has Hector done to me? And we see Hector's this great guy. Like, really, there's no reason to be mad at him, which we will circle back to in a later chapter. But the next one, there's a festival coming, and they are approached by Thetis. She says that the gods are choosing sides, and hold on, I'm skipping ahead even. No. Hold on. Hey, I'm lost. Okay. I'm trying to remember if there's something before that. I feel like there was. So we find out that Achilles was meeting with Thetis more, and while she's meeting with Thetis, Patroclus and Briseis would secretly like go out and wait for him. She would take him to a spot, sit and wait with him. And then we find out that like there's going to hold on. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry. I read this like right before we started.
It's fine.
She says that there's strangeness among the gods. That's what she tells him in this first one. That they're fighting with each other, taking sides in the war. She fears that the gods have promised me fame, but not how much. And so Patroclus is like, ooh, shit, new fear unlocked. Because we know that all of these heroes, some of them, like, we hear just a tiny bit about. They have, like, one or two sentences. And then the other ones have whole epics. And so we know he's going to have fame, but what kind of fame? We also have heard at this point that Ajax has tried and failed, and Diomedes have tried and failed in single combat to Hector. They're still both alive because Hector's a great dude and he just stalemates them. But, like, you know, I want to say even Hector's probably holding out for Achilles. Who knows if he's aware of the prophecy himself? But, like, the fact that he stalemates these dudes kind of makes me think he's like, I'm not going to take you out. I have no beef with you. Mm-hmm. He's doing the same thing. Yeah. So, let's see. How long do we have to skip ahead before the real stuff? Oh, the next part is where I got heartbroken, actually, for Patroclus. Because he finds his place. With Achilles going to battle, Patroclus is eventually able to go less. So people are expecting Achilles out on the battlefield every day. They start expecting that Patroclus is really only going to be there if Achilles wants him. And so Patroclus then gets the idea, like, why don't I check out the physician's tent? Achilles tells him they're looking for people there. And so he goes. And when he's there, at first he's just holding salves with Machaon, I believe is how you say that. And he's holding his salves for him, but then somebody else comes in injured and he can't handle it. And it's a dude with a arrow through his shoulder. And so Patroclus is like, oh shit, I can't handle this. And then ends up figuring out how to take care of it himself. He like saws off part of the spear because the spear, like normally they would break it off and then try to take it out. This sounds so awful thinking of this, but they would try to take it out from the other side without getting any splinters into the wound so that there's no infection or festering or anything. Mm-hmm. And so it was too short on one end for him to break off. And so he had to ask somebody to get him a knife, and then he sawed it off and then was able to take it out. And it healed better than anyone ever did, even though the guy that normally would help was like, you could have just tried to break it anyway, dude. And like once they realized, oh, he's actually really good at this, people start calling after him. They start actually recognizing him, and he's healing all of the major dudes. So people start knowing who he is as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
this is like the stuff that I feel like is good when you know like what happens to him in like a tragic way of like he could have been like this his whole life. Like if he would have been able to live or thought that he could have a life like without Achilles, at least in this version of the story, he could have been somebody like this that like helped a lot of people and like healed a lot of people and helped them figure out like new ways to help people that other like basically doctors hadn't thought of at that time. And it's like sad in that sort of way to see that all of that like stops because of this thing with him. And I know that this is supposed to be like a love story, so you're supposed to want that to take like precedent, but it is like just like a sad thing that he has this really interesting storyline for himself that could have kept going.
yeah.
But it just like doesn't, and you just like wish a lot of these like chapters with him was like seeing opportunities for him to have other something else happen, and he's just like, no, Achilles is the only thing that will ever make me happy. And it just reminds me of so many people that I've heard of or seen when they're young, especially like thinking that this person is the only person that will ever feel this way about me, and so I can't like survive without them, sort of thing. And it's like I wish that they, and you just like want to like shake them and make them realize that they're a lot more than that one person in their life. And it feels like that with him, of like him being like, oh, I could be a doctor, and the other stuff that happens with the girl later on. And it's just like you don't even consider these other options for yourself because you don't think that you like deserve it, or you don't even think about yourself outside of Achilles. And it just kind of makes me sad. I wish that he did.
Yeah, it makes him a very flat character that like it's his only character motivation, and he's stuck perpetually in this place of self-loathing, of low self-esteem. And then like that's why it's hard for me reading this, like him actually finding his place and him actually starting to feel good about something, because I know that it's going to be very short-lived. And so yeah, we get the start of his journey as the medic. That's what he's decided his contribution to the war is, and everybody seems very happy that he's doing it. Meanwhile, they decide to have a conversation with Briseis at some point and ask her what she knows about Hector, because she's from one of the surrounding communities that's allied with them. She would theoretically know something. She says, I don't know much about Hector, but I know about his wife. So she tells him her name's Andromache, and she's the lovely daughter of King Edion of Sicilia. Hector is said to love her above all things. He first saw her when he came to her father's kingdom for tribute. She welcomed him, entertained him, and feasted that evening. At the night's end, Hector asked her father for his hand. The other thing we hear about her is people say that she's fair. Not the fairest girl Hector could have found, but she's known to be sweet and gentle. The people of the country love her because she brings food and clothes. Right now, she's pregnant, but I haven't heard what became of the child. Or she was pregnant, but I haven't heard what became of the child. So that is Astyanax that we're hearing about. And with hearing that about her too, it's like not only is Hector a great person, but we're also setting up Andromache as a great person. Which like compare and contrast. I feel like they're trying to do that with the two couples right here.
Yeah,
And
it's like hard to hear how Hector. So the only way I know how to describe this is like unhealthy, unhealthy, whatever, like relationships versus like healthy, like mature ones.
yeah,
And so Hector and his wife are like the more mature one, where they have their life, they have their children, they have a healthy relationship, they have other things in their life that they are interested in, outside of each other. Like their entire lives are not just their relationship. Yes, their relationship is important, but they have other things in their life that like make them feel happy or have community with other people besides just themselves.
yeah,
And and Achilles and Patroclus don't have that. And like yeah, part of it is because they're, kids still at this point. They're like 20 because they've been
mhm,
there for 4 years, and so they're still very young, and you're more likely to do that when you're young. But it just reminded me of like me and her been talking about old friends we've had and realizing like wow, that was like actually a really bad friend and I just didn't realize it at the time. And like that's what that this is like reminding me of like Achilles and Patroclus think that this is like the best sort of like bond they could ever have, and they don't see how they're like kind of isolating themselves from everyone else around them and putting so much of their identities on each other. And especially knowing like what happens with Hector and stuff later, it's really hard to think that somebody like that and like his wife are horribly affected by these people when the only thing that they do wrong is that they hurt somebody that is like in war with them, that is like trying to kill them. So like what else is he supposed to do in that moment other than what he ends up doing? Like it's you're in a gigantic battle with him. Can you really be that angry at him? Even if he kills somebody that you care about, he's done it because you've been fighting against him for years and doing things like this to him and his people. So like what else is he supposed to do? Just like not do that to you because it makes you upset. And it's like that sort of feeling of it's hard to see people that have like an entire life knowing that the Greek side just kind of showed up thinking that they could show up and like steal Helen back and get a bunch of money, sex traffic a bunch of girls, and then leave. And oh, I don't remember if this happened in this chapter or another chapter, but I just need to state because of who I am as a person that Patroclus is describing the girls getting pregnant as like them getting pregnant as them like sleeping with the men and like building families with them made me want to vomit.
it's
Like
coming up. Yeah,
that was disgusting for me to like read that. I was just like what is going on, where like
yeah,
part of this book is talking about that as like a bad thing. Like he was upset about that happening literally the last chapter, and now he's like oh it's great that these like women are like finding men to be with and they're consensually having baby. They are literally held prisoner. The only thing that they can do is have sex with people. It's not even sex, they're being like raped because they don't have consent. You can't have consent when you can't leave or like can't tell somebody no. Like the only way that they have as survival in this world is if they find a man to protect them from the rest of the men from raping them. And so it's like to see it being described as like, oh look, now time has gone by and they're starting to have kids together, and isn't this so wonderful? And I'm like, no, it's not.
yeah.
This isn't wonderful at all. What the heck is going on?
Yeah, so well, when we end this chapter, because Bryceus had just told them that Andromache's dad is King Eetion, and that she's from Sicily. We find out that that's one of the raids that Achilles went on, and he killed all but one of King Eetion's 8 sons. And Patroclus was like, "Well, at least you left one," and like, oh,
That sent me like over the edge for a second. Like I just like stopped reading it for a second because I was just like, "Oh my fucking god." Like Achilles killed and in like the fact that he's like saying it as like a nice thing of like, "Oh, if you kill an entire family line, commit genocide essentially against an entire family, then that's like a good thing. You get like rewarded for that." And so Achilles deserves like brownie points because he didn't do that. And I'm like, what is going on?
oh my
Like the like last chapter we were reading, you were talking about how upsetting it was that they were killing farmers that didn't have anything to do with anything. And those people still have nothing to do with anything.
yeah,
And but now you're like, "Oh, Achilles is so great because he stopped him. He only killed 7 of the family members instead of 8." And it's just like he literally like showed like massacred an entire family just because they happened to be there, and then later on realized like, "Oh, I killed the person who I'm supposed to fight one day, his entire family line." And it's like maybe you shouldn't eradicate entire families and then this situation would never happen to
yeah,
you. But it's just like I don't know. It's always odd how like this is why I don't like war stories that talk about battles in this sort of a way,
mm-hmm.
because war is disgusting, and if you're not talking about it in a way of like showing the depravity of what people have to do in it, and instead like trying to justify it, I'm just like I don't want to. I don't want to read this, and so that also just felt like a ginormous like plot anvil falling on our heads,
Right,
that they have Patroclus being or have Achilles being like, "Oh, I guess he has a reason to be upset with me now," and it's like, you think?
yeah.
God.
Yeah, so where we ended the first chapter we talked about today with, I have no reason, we find out that Hector has reasons.
Very
And
good reasons, and
yeah,
that's like what I was trying to say about like them being like the more like immature, and like Hector and his wife being more like mature. Like you,
yeah,
like basically took
exactly.
out his entire family line. The fact that the story is more focused on Achilles, and you're like, and people like are glad that he kills Hector and things like that, and it's like you killed his entire family and you're losing it like this because he killed one person. Like imagine what you would feel like if he killed that many people
It's
that you love.
Andromache's family that we're talking about in this particular instance, but he does kill a lot of his family.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's like you killed all these people that he
that
cares about,
yeah.
and like imagine how upset you would be if he did something like that to you, and he never did that to you.
Yeah, so this next chapter after this is all about the unrest now of, it's been 4 years. People saying, "Oh, I'm too sick to fight. I'm not going to go fight."
Mm-hmm.
And then we have Patroclus realizing the juxtaposition between himself, who feels like, "Oh, we've been here 4 years and Achilles isn't dead yet, yay." And all of these people who that's 4 years stolen from them spending time with their wives and children back at home. Um, and people are getting so caught up in this unrest that they're to the point of mutiny. And at one point, Agamemnon finds himself surrounded, and Achilles decides that he's gonna break it up, but he takes the piss out of Agamemnon first. So, um, Agamemnon finds himself in the middle of the Agora, the makeshift city market that they've created on the beach of Troy. And he doesn't have his usual guards with him. So when there's a bunch of people that don't want to move out of the way for him, all of a sudden he's surrounded. Achilles jumps to the top of like what they're all standing by, and he's like, "Tell me, do you think Aristos Achaeon fights in hopeless wars?" All of the men are like, "No," and he's like, "You could go home if you want, but I'm taking your treasure if you do." And just tries to like make it a joke. And what Patroclus, our narrator, says here is the Prince Achilles spoke of treasure to be won. The Prince Achilles spoke of treasure to be won, and where there was greed, there was hope. So by inciting this, we're going to get treasure, and I'm going to take your treasure, he gets the men back on his side. After that, the mutiny dies down a bit, and Odysseus decides, I'm going to make sure all of these men are busy so they don't do this shit again. And he wants to build kind of like a moat, so to speak, around the campment and have spikes and stuff just so that there's no night raids on them. And this ends up working by like not only Odysseus but Diomedes then steps forward and is like, "Yeah, let's do it." And so everybody gets on board with this building project. And that's when Patroclus starts talking about this shift that we're mentioning, where people are starting to settle in. They've been there so long. They're starting to treat it like an actual occupation. Um, they're having to make things because the things that they brought were broken. He says everything we owned was now makeshift scourge, having lived at least two lives before being something else. And he also kind of feels more at home in this because he's been spending all of his time in the tent. He's been, like known for having quick hands that cause little pain among all of the soldiers. So they all want him to fix them up.
Mm-hmm.
And he also talks about how him and Achilles are kind of like opening up their tent to people at night and pretending to be adults almost. And like, they have a group that regularly comes and hangs out, and it's them and Briseis, and they love it so much. Let's see. But then that's when the gods have chosen sides. You guys need to sacrifice to Apollo comes into play. Thetis comes, she interrupts this peacefulness that we're having and says, yeah, the gods have finally decided something needs to happen. Apollo kind of is mad at you and is looking for a reason. So I don't care what the rest of the captains do. You, Achilles, you are to sacrifice a hecatomb, which means 100 animals. And so that means they spend the whole next day just slaughtering, essentially, and laying the groundwork so that Apollo's not going to get mad at them. After this happens, let's see. Or sorry, no. Before that, there's more. A prophecy that the best of the Myrmidons plant anvil once again. Plot anvil once again. Because, like, we know who she's saying the best of the Myrmidons is here. But she's saying another prophecy has come about, by the way. The best of the Myrmidons will die before 2 more years have passed. And it's not you, Achilles. I don't agree that it's the best, but yeah, that's what the prophecy says. I think it's a trick.
Oh, God. Boy mom to the very end.
And of course, as she's like turning away from telling him this, she's like, oh, and also that boy never liked him for you. And Achilles was like, yeah, agree to disagree, Mom. Bye.
He's like, yeah, I quite literally don't care.
Yeah. Let's see. So then they do the sacrifice. Patroclus, our narrator, says, I was not known for my piety, but that day I praised Apollo with an intensity that could have rivaled Peleus himself. So he is being as pious as possible during this sacrifice to make sure Achilles doesn't die for whatever anger Apollo's about to have. But then, we skip forward a little bit into time, and we come to, they don't say it, but I'm pretty sure this is one of those times where Briseis and Patroclus are by themselves because Achilles is conferring with his mom. She asks him to teach her medicine. And as they're out there, she goes for it. She kisses him. And she's like, I know you love Achilles, but some men have a lover and a wife. Like, I thought maybe we could do that.
This part, like, the earlier scenes, I was wondering, like, what they were doing with them, like, because they made a point that she didn't choose to, like, be with another man and stuff, and I was just like, oh, I wonder why that is. And then I don't remember what it is, but she does or says something during that part leading up to it where it just clicked in my head. It was like, oh, they're gonna have her like him, and he's gonna have to like turn her down. Like, I get it. I don't remember what it was that made me suddenly realize that that's what they were doing. And so when it happened, I wasn't like surprised, at least, but it is another thing that it's like sad to me that just that like he has like another person that um likes him for him, and it doesn't have like the gods or anything else crazy like that happening, and he just is like, no, I don't want a wife. Like, granted, he's gay, fine, fine, but it also is just a thing of, this is like they're showing him like almost like the possibility that there are other ways for you to be happy, and he's just like, no, like,
Yeah.
this is the only thing. And it's like, this is the first thing,
It
like,
was
you don't
very,
know.
yeah. And so she comes to him with, like, okay, maybe you don't want a wife, but do you ever want to be a parent? Like, have you ever thought about having kids? And he's like, I don't think I'd be much of a parent. So, it kind of just ends there between them, and they don't talk about it. But he does discuss it with Achilles. He starts off with, like, did you ever think about having kids? Not remembering that Achilles does have a child.
Yeah,
Uh,
and Achilles is like, I do have a kid that I'm just being a deadbeat dad to.
exactly. Better that my mom's raising him. So we know that his name's Neoptolemus, which means new war. He's nicknamed Pyrrhus, remember his girl name was Pyrrha. So, and it's also talking about the red hair.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, he looks like him, is what we're getting, even though Achilles doesn't know and didn't ask. Um, and yeah, we know Thetis is off raising him. But Achilles finds out that Briseis approached him with this, like, do you want a wife? Do you want to have kids? Like, I figure we could do something here. And he's like, well, you could if you wanted to, but like, he's acting jealous about it.
Mm-hmm.
And Patroclus is reading it. He's like, no, I don't want to. I'm good. I love you.
This
And
part is like the very,
yeah,
like the end, obviously,
that's
but
that's what we read for today. And with Briseis, with the setup with Briseis,
mm-hmm.
I don't like this setup with almost a triangle, because like the story in the Iliad is Achilles genuinely like wanted to make her a bride, and that's why he was distraught at her getting taken away. But also now we have this, like, Patroclus would have been her husband. So Achilles has his own reasons. He's attached to her. I don't know if Madeline's going to write it that he's only angered at Agamemnon on Patroclus's behalf when she gets taken away, or if he's also going to get approached by her to have babies, or
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where this is going. I don't love it. And poor Briseis, because she's just trying to figure out what normal is going to be, and I'm glad she's where she's at, but she's not going to be there for much longer.
Yeah, it feels like, when you're watching like a TV show and like a side character has like an entire episode about them, and you're like, this means you're gonna die. That's exactly what this is. Like, you know that something is gonna happen to her because they're making her such an important person. Like the way that Patrocles is like, they're like teaching each other things and all this stuff, and I was like, oh Jesus Christ. And like knowing that that's just there to make it like worse, whatever happens, however she writes what happens later. But also the thing that like I was just like, I give up with how she writes this stuff, is that this entire book, it's like Achilles is not allowed to have any feelings for anyone but Patrocles, and now we get to this chapter and he's like, it's fine if you want to have a wife too, and it's like, what? Like, what now? That's okay.
That's the
When it's
thing.
when it's Patrocles, it's okay, but when it's Achilles, you would rather have both of them be raped by the same girl because he can't have any of their feelings about another person. And I was
Yeah.
just like, I don't understand you.
Well, yeah, so this whole chapter was set up so we have Patroclus finally having slices of happiness. He sees a life where he could potentially be a father and he sees like a dark-haired child with Briseis, but Achilles isn't there and he just can't. He just can't. So, like, that's him officially trying to get away. I just didn't leave these feeling great about what's going to happen next.
That's why I was like, I can literally like feel that something's gonna happen to her in the next chapter, and it's gonna be like dramatic and wild and over the like just emotional and crazy,
Yeah.
and
Well,
I
it
just
won't happen like right away though, because we're at year 4, and the Iliad takes place at year 10, and that's when the whole Agamemnon thing happens.
yeah, so there must be like some sort of time jump or something, but
Yeah.
it's just like you can just like feel what is about to happen, and I'm just like, oh god, I don't know how this is gonna go, or but I know that something like crazy emotional wise is going to happen in some way in every chapter probably we're going to read until the end, because there's not that I looked up like how many chapters it has, and it has like 31 I think, and
Yeah.
so there's only like 5 or 6 more before we get to the end, and so it all has to happen now at like some point. um I don't know, this book is such a weird experiment,
Yeah.
because I'm like, I get why people like it, I guess, but because if you just get caught up with like the romance, but it is interesting from like every other perspective besides that to look at it and just be like, I'm not sure what you're doing. And like Madeline Miller did publish this in 2011, so I'm hoping that she feels differently than like the ableist sort of way she describes a lot of stuff.
Achilles.
Yeah, I'm hoping that she doesn't realizes that that was very off and not how that stuff is. But that's how it is in this book forever. And so it's one of those things of this is always how she depicts it, no matter what you do. And it's just interesting that this is like the depiction of Achilles and Patroclus that people like so much. And I'm not sure that I don't know if it's a thing that they like it because it's actually the best version or because it's just a version of them canonically together. And if somebody else wrote a different version, if they would probably like it more if it was done differently or something. It's one of those things of maybe they like it a lot because it's the first version, and maybe one day people won't like it as much,
Yeah. I
because
have
other people do it better.
I have a friend who's very classics inclined in my comments to Teddy, saying he has so many problems with this book and agrees so much. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say even the romance for me is very flat because it's just, they're so monogamous and devoted to each other that, like, this Bryceus thing coming about, yes, we hear that he's imagining a reality where he's with her, but we know it's not going to be like we know for sure that's never going to happen. At least to give a contrast, like in Twilight. Well, actually, in Twilight, we also knew she was never going to choose Jacob, but it felt more real there than it did here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like it's a whole thing that like in pseudo love triangle situations, even like even if you know that they're gonna pick one person, it's still interesting to see like how they get there. That's like the fun of it, is to figure out like when you're reading, because we talk about Percy Jackson most of the time, you know that Annabeth and Percy are probably going to get together, but you're wondering like how it's actually going to happen.
And we
And
have
so
to
like
love triangle this next book that we're going to read.
yeah, and so it's like you are wondering what's gonna happen. So when like when Rachel shows up, you're like curious about what this really means, because you know like narrative wise likely what is gonna end, how it's gonna end, but you don't know how we're gonna get there. And so that's like the fun of stories usually, even when you know the ending, is when the characters and stuff are like executed really well. You're just like okay, and like Madeline Miller is still a really good author and everything. You can tell she is, but it's just like this story, I don't know, I the way that she like needs them to be like the only people, literally the only people that are like moral and like never make a mistake in the way that everyone else around them does, it just like lessens their characterization by being so aggressive about them in that sort of a way. It's like it reminds me of how people online are like, is this problematic? It's like that sort of a thing of like we're writing these people in this time that they would do a lot of things that people usually wouldn't like, and so I'm just going to write a story where they don't do any of those things so that people can just enjoy their love story. um but that like takes away from their characterization, I think.
Yeah. Also, Teddy, no problem. Like, well, we edit some of the YouTube recordings. I just don't like to go off topic too much when I talk about them, but I'll answer stuff on topic for sure. And also value the male experience here with this book because we can't offer that.
No, we can't.
Yeah. Okay. Anyways, we stopped there for today with reading, but that's what we'll end with. I can't stay for the Percy Jackson stuff because we're already at William's bedtime. But like,
Yeah.
um,
The only thing I wanted to make sure to say about Percy Jackson stuff is that Rick posted today that the Nico Will book,
mhm,
they're supposed to announce on the 28th, like the news about the book. Gonna die soon too. But I just wanted to make sure to say that
yeah.
he said that news is coming out on the 28th. That based on that one blog that his SEO blog wrote, I think that Hazel is going to be in that book in some way, and it will have something to do with like Rome, the camp Rome. We'll see if that happens, but that's just like the only Percy Jackson thing really. Um,
Mhm.
that's really going on right now is just that. So if you're a queer kid that needs something like that gives
Look
you
forward.
serotonin, that will give you serotonin very soon.
Yes. So Friday is when that's coming out, and yeah. So we'll be back next week for more Song of Achilles, and hopefully not more deep dives to that your haters.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.